All right. We're
Good
live, y'all.
morning. How's it
Good
going?
morning.
Good morning, Ryan. Good morning, Andy.
Morning. Morning, gentlemen.
Looks like we got a few people joining in Saturday morning.
Yes, we do.
Hope the sun's shining wherever you're at.
Oh,
Yeah,
definitely nice here.
is it?
It's supposed to get a little chilly here in Northern California for a bit.
Okay, that's the same up here. It just cooled down kind of this morning, and we're going to have cooler weather for a week as well. Still nice out, but we had a little bit of rain. I'm sure it's the same where you're from. When you get your rain, you're kind of happy when you've had a few weeks of hot weather. Good for the plants.
Yeah, definitely. When we don't get no rain, I have to water quite a bit, and that gets a little expensive.
For sure. Yeah. Nice when you can let them get soaked. Like if you have a rainy day or two, let it saturate and then let them have their dry back and root down. Can you hear us now, Ryan?
I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we
Perfect,
can
man.
definitely hear you.
Good to see you,
Nice.
dude.
You guys as well.
Yeah, we should have a good show today. We're going to have Angus on. Angus is in the UK right now from the Real Seed Company. They've got some fantastic stuff. I mean, check out his IG page, check out the Real Seed Company online page and all the great landrace work they've got. There's also Quick Seeds. We'll chat with Angus about all this and let him kind of steer the story for us and let us know where all that inspiration to start the business came from. Traveling, he's traveled all over the world. He's, very knowledgeable. So I'm sure we can, ask some questions and he'd probably be able to give some really good answers and tell us about his journey. And then we can maybe if we have some questions that come through the comments, we can pass those on to Angus and see if he can answer some questions for us and tell us about some cool landrace varieties and travels as well.
Super excited for this one.
Definitely. Yeah.
Ryan, I just saw your picture. You just finally got to post your volunteer of your Ravi Rose, was that your Autolang Indian pheno from last year that dropped seeds?
Grahan, yes.
The Grahan. Okay, that
Yep,
was your
yep.
Grahan.
That was straight from Ravi. So the guest that we've had on before, that was right out of his family's gardens. She's the one that we got to see the COA on.
Gotcha.
So yeah, 1-to-1 essentially, real low cannabinoid profile, but I fell in love with the plant. I love her aroma, and she did really, really well out here in Arizona. So loving it. I crossed her with the ADAG13, and that's the volunteer this year. So no selection, letting Mother Nature put her hand into it and see what she gives me. So right now I'm impressed. The plant is resilient as shit. Winds were like 35, 45 miles an hour yesterday, and she's just sitting there dancing, no problems whatsoever.
No
So,
problem. Already
nope.
rooted deep. Hey, those volunteers, they
Oh,
get the
yeah.
roots down early, right?
Yeah, her stalk's almost 1.5 inches in diameter right now. So,
Love that.
yep, it'll be nice. It'll be
Love
real,
that.
real nice.
Yeah, and I guess you could have this one come in at obviously a different COA could come through this one, and
Oh,
especially
absolutely.
when you're crossing a native variety or a landrace variety that already has mixed ratios in it, right? So
Hmm.
anything could pop out of this. You could get your
Anything.
high type 1, your mixed ratio. Who knows what you might get this time?
Might get a 20% or CBD,
Yeah.
that and have no THC essentially whatsoever. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's a roll of the dice every time, but that's what I'm here for.
Hell yeah.
Hell
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's the
Hell
best
yeah.
part of the land race that I find is the diversity in it. Some people might think that because a land race comes from one place and it, keeps getting bred into itself, that it's all the same thing, but that's just not the case. I mean, when you have multiple males and multiple females and all that seed gets used again, it's just so diverse.
Yep.
And we can all pull something we want out of land race. Even if someone tells you what it's like, you can still go hunting for what you're looking for and you might find that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mr. Toad has said it multiple times that a lot of these landrace gene
Oh
pools,
shucks,
they're all
we
heterozygous.
have. I'm sorry, guys. We have Angus
No.
coming on, so I want to make sure we
Please.
get him on ASAP.
Let's
Yes, let's
go.
Let's
do it.
get him to the
Let's welcome
stage.
Angus.
There we go, Angus. Welcome.
Hey, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we
Yes,
can
we
hear
can.
you.
Oh, nice. Yeah, sorry, it's going to have to be an avatar, not my not actually me.
For sure.
That's all right.
No worries. We're happy to have you on. Glad you made it. Glad the time change has worked for everybody on both sides of the ocean.
Yeah. You're probably on the sort of upward caffeinated curve. I'm on the sort of downward evening curve, but you know.
Yeah, we're sipping the coffees for sure. I'm on number 3 already, so
I'm on some horrible British beer, but you know, that's just how it's going to have to be. Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me on. Yeah, it's a pleasure, and hopefully I've got something worth saying, worth hearing, or whatever. But yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
I a few moments of what you were just talking about. But
yeah, I was just trying to give a brief introduction, Angus, but I mean, you be the best to try to maybe just give us a little introduction yourself on, you know, what you have, your company, the Real Seed Company, and maybe your background to cannabis, and maybe what inspired you to going the direction you've gone, and maybe what's inspired you to go traveling and collecting landrace. How did that all begin for you?
Oh, right. Okay. So yeah, it's a sort of lifelong interest, I guess. From my perspective, it was something that I got interested in the 90s, really. I mean, as a teenager, you know, and you know, that was a point in UK kind of cannabis culture where you had a pretty rapid sudden appearance of a lot of kind of Dutch American varieties in the UK. They've been around already, but you know, I basically grew up at a point where if you saw sort of skunk and that type of stuff, which you did, you know, it was in the shops, you could see the sort of sacred seeds packs of skunk #1 and things in any kind of head shop in any English town at that point. But it was still kind of a novelty, you know. And my parents' generation were all boomers. They were kind of hippie type characters who'd done the hippie trail and stuff. Basically, every time we'd get kind of some Dutch weed, they'd be like, "Oh, this is terrible," you know, and they'd start kind of preaching to us about the horrors of the horrors of modern varieties and how it's not like it used to be. And after a while, when you've had that lecture enough times, you start thinking maybe they're talking the truth, you know. So sort of slowly kind of got into actually, you know, stealing bits of hash off them or getting given bits of hash off them, you know, to prove the point, and kind of realized they were actually onto something, you know. These were kind of mates of mine's dads and stuff and that kind of thing, you know, painters and these kind of people who'd like drive us to school smoking a pipe of Nepalese out of the door of the car, things that you're not supposed to do anymore. Yeah, you know, so that's kind of what got me interested, and sort of at some point noticed that along with a couple of mates of mine that people were looking for seeds of this kind of stuff, knew where to go, and it just sort of evolved from there, you know. Really, it started as a hobby, I mean, and it's never really got beyond being a website as opposed to a business, you know, but it is what it is.
All the right reasons, it sounds like, and you had all the right influences as well. You had the right generation that kind of maybe kicked you in the right direction in terms of you relating that old school cannabis compared to the modern day, hey?
Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, like as kind of British teenagers and British people generally, like, it's the worst place in the world in some ways for cannabis, but it's also really good because it's an island, so it's extremely easy to smuggle things into. But the general attitude prevailing amongst us, we would just laugh at our parents in some ways when, or, you know, friends of mine's parents, when they were delivering these lectures. They're just like, "Oh, shut up, it's all just cannabis," you know. I was never quite that bad, but certainly friends of mine were, you know. It's a real kind of barbarian attitude towards it in some ways, you know. like it's Americans who, for the most part, and the Spanish and people in Europe who have actually really, Canadians, Americans, whatever, who've really kind of done stuff with cannabis. In the UK, it's not. It's a very kind of Philistine attitude towards it for the most part. So if you go onto the Seedsman websites, for example, he was one of the first sort of people we actually sold seeds through. Look at their selection for the UK as opposed to their selection for America, right? Their UK selection is like absolutely dialed down to just the basics. It's like skunk Afghan hybrids with different names, or whatever, right? Like, because that's mostly what you'll find in the UK if you are buying weed. That's overstating it, but that's more or less the picture, So if you wanted to have like nice things which were around, like Milana Cream and Swazi Red and Nigerian and Lebanese Blonde or whatever, they were around, but you had to know someone or you had to seek them out, So we started doing what we were doing partly because like we were bringing back bits of like Nepalese and Indian charas when we went on holiday, We're like, well, if we're doing this, we may as well post some stuff back, seeds and things, It was as sort of basic as that, but I've always had a bit more of a kind of nerdy interest in it, So I got deeper into it and realized how much there is out there, Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
So
we're all
Angus-
excited you did.
Yeah.
But, all right, yeah. Sorry if I'm not really kind of stringing together like very coherent sentences at this point, but yeah, I mean that's more or less.
Okay.
If you're asking how it started, that's kind of a broad sketch of what it was like.
I'm curious, Angus, are you more of a flower consumer or hashish with tobacco?
I've never like really had a preference in the sense that for me it's all about diversity of options, diversity of choices. There's
Okay.
right things, right time, and wrong things, whatever, And for me, like, I guess if someone sort of held me at gunpoint and was like, you have to choose, I probably would go with tropical varieties, Lao, Thai, Orissa, Malawi, that kind of thing. There's something with those that
As far as flowers go.
Yeah, that's all flower, yeah, like you say. But there's something you get with really nice Himalayan hand rubbed hash. There's something you get with really good Afghan sieved hash. It's all sort of got its own particular thing, and what anyone knows who's got experience with these things, there's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of diversity there compared to generic Dutch American gene pools. I don't want to get sort of pigeonholed as being against that stuff, but there is way more, as I think you were saying before I appeared, there is so much heterozygosity, whatever you want to call it, within these. There's so much genetic diversity within these populations, and it's for the most part unrealized and untapped. That's probably the most important thing for people to get clear on, that I don't think even at this point has really landed for most people, like even aficionados. Like, there is so much more untapped potential in the genetics. No one is really doing, or very, very, very few people are really doing IBLs out of these populations. Everyone, not everyone, but still far too many people are like, oh, I get a landrace and I hybridize it. It's just, that's not what you should be doing. Like 2 or 3 generations is all you need to see it absolutely radical transformation in what you've got in terms of turning something that grown from seed will give you some outstanding plants, like with a lot of average stuff. 2-3 generations of inbreeding, you can have like
you'll narrow everything down so much that you'll lose all that unique expression for the most part.
No, I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying
if you inbreed
of inbreeding on a landrace, you will see a radical improvement in the landrace.
Gotcha.
No one's doing that.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
right.
No
because it's so diverse. Yes, I hear what you're saying. Because it's, if you took it a couple generations, you could choose the more resinous ones or something like that and improve it that way. Is that correct?
while
Yeah, I mean,
keeping all the
that's what-
uniqueness of the population.
yeah, you're not going to see like any. I think it's really underappreciated the extent to which a lot of what got passed around in the 70s and 80s was the product of not more than a couple of generations of people selectively inbreeding within a population, creating IVLs. Only a handful of people bothered to do it. So you ended up, like, I mean, handful, I'm talking in terms of the numbers of people who were growing and breeding. Very few people bothered to actually just do what people like Mel Frank and whoever did, and just inbred a line like Afghani #1 or whatever, you know? Most people just assume that like you had to find the amazing strain out there somewhere. Whereas actually, if you just started with a good landrace and you did a couple of generations of inbreeding, that's all it takes. Like, and I have like out of all the people I've sold seeds to over the years, a few people have bothered to do that, and all of them are like, wow, I didn't realize, you know, that all it takes is a couple of generations of just picking the good mother plant. Like you have to have bothered to lightly pollinate everything, keep the seeds from that, grow that the next generation, keep the seeds from the good mother plant, grow that the next generation. You're going to have an absolutely transformative difference in the quality. You know, like land races respond really quickly to just that light level of artificial selection that is involved in doing that. Like, let your males pollinate the females, keep the seeds of the good females, grow them the next season. That's all it takes. And like within 3 generations, you have a total increase in potency, like typical potency increase, typical resin, massive increase, all of that, you know. And you only need to be going over sort of 10% THC, which is a good tropical landrace will be over that anyway. And you'll have like a really nice IBL, you know.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great optimistic way to look at it, and it's kind of the opposite to what we do. Yeah, like, you know, most people are growing the modern hybrids and it's already been worked, so you can pop a pack and you can find your clone. But, you know, with the landrace, instead of trying to pop your pack and letting it go and just picking a female, the clone, and saying that's the one, you know, we should be maybe chipping in and like you say, working a couple generations in, doing a little bit of improvement. And if you can see such great improvement within a couple generations, then somebody's maybe done something good for something. Maybe you're not open pollinating it for preservation, but like you say, working it to make it a little bit better, and then you might find something more appealing when you pop those later generations.
The reason it's in my mind, okay, is like there's a variety from Vientiane province. It's on the site as Central Lao. A guy bought it. It's just a pretty generic Lao Vientiane variety. So he's done like 2 generations, I think, and is just blown away by like the fact that it's like he's been growing it in pots indoors. It's adapted to that. It's just pumping out resin. All he did is just keep the seeds from the good female and grow them, you know. And I was talking to this, and this is something I can attest to from lines that we've maintained and just done a light selective pressure every generation, like the Lebanese and the Mazari Sharif. People will write to me saying, "Oh wow, you know, I mean, I didn't realize like the Mazari Sharif is such a good line," and it's like, no, it's just one that we happen to have done a little bit of selection for resin on. Like we've had it since 2006, 2007, and we've just had to do some maintenance grows. And we were like, well, we're gonna just try to keep as much diversity as possible. We're only going to cut down the females that are noticeably off and the males that are noticeably off, and then just each season we'll use the seeds from each time we do a maintenance grow, we'll use the seeds from the best, most resinous females. 2-3 generations in, radical transformation of the typical quality of each plant from seed. And talking to people who are doing these big research surveys, talking to the underground growers and stuff from the 70s, 80s, and 90s and 2000s, interviewing them, rather talking to people who are doing those projects, these interview projects on the West Coast and stuff that various universities are doing. Everyone says the same thing, you know, that's all it took, like 3 generations of work, you know. But no one does it. Everyone's outcrossing everything, you know, and it's just it's sad because I think people are too quick to assume that like the magic is somewhere else, and some, you know, that you've got to find that special line. Like any good ganja landrace from the tropics has got that potential. Like all of them have that, you know, because they're all basically what turned into haze, you know. It's all the same shit, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I heard you mention harissa, and is that an area that's kind of northern India before Nepal? And you said that was kind of one of your favorites. Can you speak a little bit on that?
Harissa is not one of my favorites, but it's a very likely plausible candidate for like probably one of the places that's got a really 500 years plus old culture of Sinsamila type cultivation, you know. So it's likely where this text called Anandakunda comes from, which is an old Sanskrit alchemical pharmaceutical text, and it describes, you know, cutting down the males and techniques for improving the resin production of the females and all these things. And it's at least 500 years old. It could be more like 800 years old. And it's around that region of what's now Andhra Pradesh and Orissa that pretty likely that compendium was compiled. And yeah, if you look at Orissa, you know, I've had a sort of glimpse at some preliminary genomics data of that area, and this is like apropos of the stuff I was saying about how it's all the same. It's not all the same, but it's all very admixed. Like all of these populations have been in a continual back and forth of like Thai, Lao, Burmese, Sumatran, Orissan, Kerala, even up into Afghanistan. You can see in the genomics data that all of these populations have been in a kind of ongoing process of gene flow and artificial selection for hundreds of years, probably at least, you know, because there's been this maritime connection between all these places. People were trading for spices and gold and porcelain and elephants and whatever else, you know. And yeah, so Orissa just is a sort of like likely candidate for being a really old center of ganja cultivation. And it's a good sort of example. Like when I went to Orissa, I didn't see anything I thought was particularly noteworthy, but we got the seed, people grew them out, and they're like, yeah, this is like a really good sativa, you know. It's strong, it has like really good potency. Analyze it genetically, yeah, it's like got loads of Southeast Asian influence.
People in the chat want to know if there's any influence from the Iduki in Orissa.
Like I couldn't say that for sure because the sort of the preliminary data I was looking at was just breaking everything down into like the different well-defined populations. But there's definitely, you'd be surprised how much Afghan influence there is in the Idukki Kerala variety, whatever. It's and that's not just to be very clear, that's not Afghan coming from modern hybrid introduction. This is like definitely Afghan that is like landrace Afghan, you know. And yeah, there's more than you might expect. And you look at the Idukki, it's like super narrow leafleted. It's very much a tropical sativa, but it's been in gene flow with Central Asian type land races for a long time, you know, swapping backwards and forwards along trade routes, you know, some trader or whatever, or soldier or whatever, or yogi carries the things backwards and forwards. I would assume most of it would be going by sea, you know, from Karachi as it now is, you know, Sindh or whatever. Yeah, so I you know, like all of these populations just need a little bit of like IBL work. That's the really exciting thing to do, you know, is to create IBLs, you know. That's
people want to know where you think the most potential is. You talked about potential in the gene pool, and one of the first comments was ask Angus what the most cerebral, let me get the exact comment, the most cerebral euphoric line that you've ever had or that you think contains those traits.
Like, I mean, I think there's a reason why people like David Watson focused in on the Kerala stuff. You know, if you like a really markedly, distinct, like it's practically like doing pure dexedrine or something like the Kerala. Like, I'm not exaggerating. It's like it is. People smoke it and they're like, "What the fuck?" You know. And that's the same if you do the Kerala haze or something. You know, you get that same thing. So if you like being in that kind of like really amped up state, it's fantastic. You know, and it's very kind of clear as well, which is why I say pure dexedrine. It's like that kind of effect. So if you want something that's really obviously different, that's like a place to go. I think I saw somewhere like people were saying this, if you crossed it something and then you went for the blue plants that tended to show really blue traits, like that's one of the other names of those Kerala varieties is like Nila Jatayan or Nila Chadayan. I don't know how they say it in their the Malayalam, but it's Nila Jata means like blue dreadlocks, Jata, sorry, but it's blue dreadlocks is one of its nicknames, or blue poison it could be, but I'm pretty sure it's blue dreads, is one of the nicknames of it. And yeah, it's really speedy. You can see that in other stuff, but I would say Arissa's pretty speedy. The Thai can be, but Thai and Lao are like not so zingy, generally by comparison, compared to most of what you'll see in Amsterdam or something. They're like, even the Thai and Lao stuff is very stimulating, but yeah,
there's scales, there's levels to these things, and
there are.
You're trying different varieties from different locations, and you're actually smoking the plants themselves for your selection to keep breeding forward. You've got to smoke the plant yourself to know your effects.
Yeah, the thing is, one of the things I'd say, like when I'm answering these kind of questions, like the reason I'm sort of like hedging and saying, it is all good, partly because that is just the case, but also I think when you get into talking about land races with people who are like really interested, there's always this assumption that like the more precise you are about stuff and the more specific you are, that you're always being more accurate, and that's just not always the case. Like sometimes if you're too specific, you become less accurate, and with these things like the good Nepalese ganja varieties that you find in places like Lamjung and central Nepal, sort of between Kathmandu and Pokhara, around there in the mountains, they grow a lot of flower, and there's people like growing those, and they're like writing to me and they're saying like everyone calls this coke weed now because it's just like being on coke, it's like it is. So I'm sorry if I'm sort of straying off cannabis into like what are regarded as inappropriate terrain, but that's what it's like. It's things. I'm not a big fan of coke myself, but like that was the point of comparison for them. It was like it's exactly like being on. It's unrecognizable compared to what they're used to smoking, And the only point of comparison for them was like, it's just like I smoke this and I go outside and I'm just out in the garden, like gardening like a maniac,
Get the chores done type of weed for sure.
But you have to be in a good setting, because I first encountered this weed in Southeast Asia when weed was still highly illegal in places like Thailand, and I was always on edge from the cops anyway, and so smoking this stuff and you're like hyped up and you're super paranoid too. It's really intense.
Peeking through the windows.
Yeah,
absolutely make you like that, and I think that's one reason why, because the way Westerners will tend to smoke these things compared to how people will smoke them in a traditional setting, like the traditional setting, you're normally sharing it with people, so everyone does a little bowl in the bong. Often mixed with tobacco, that's just tends to be how people smoke these things in those places, like Southeast Asia and India, and also that people will be smoking them like in the morning before they go to work, so they'll smoke like a pretty small amount, like just a couple of hits, often mixed with tobacco, because they're just doing it to kind of get into the zone to go and do some mind-numbing, physically demanding job, like lugging
Absurd labor,
rail platform or whatever, you know.
Happy motivation.
Yeah, I mean, it's motivation. It's like a tonic, you know. Tonic would be the word that the Victorians used when they were in colonial era, imperial sort of writing about Indian cannabis culture, like the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission and stuff. Like, that's the context they put it in. It's like, this is being used like a tonic, you know. So it's kind of just to give you resilience, particularly if you're not eating well or enough, which is commonplace. And even these days, just the physical wear and tear of the kind of lifestyle that a lot of people have. It's like, that's mostly why they're doing it. They're not doing it to get to like a fucking +4 on the Shulgin scale. You know? Like, we come at these things from quite a different angle from traditional consumers, mostly.
Yep. But I think that's where we'll find the diversity and the nuance and the effect will help a larger market, because
But I think that's where
cannabis is a healthy alternative to many of these more physically oppressive drugs like coke, like opium, like all the other things that are prevalent in the world. Cannabis can not do the same, but can mimic some of these stimulant highs or some of the narcotic highs. And for those people to successfully get off those substances and use cannabis as an alternative is all the viability that we need. So, and I think that's where a lot of these nuanced effects can come from in the landrace population.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I personally come at these things from a different angle. Like, I'm not, I think if you're going to legalize one thing, you've got to legalize all of it. You just got to find the appropriate way to do it. Yep. Yeah. But I mean, I think in Afghanistan and places, definitely the cannabis leans towards the kind of preferences people have there for the type of effect. So, you know, there's traditionally always been a lot of opiate use in Afghanistan, and they like the kind of sedative effect that they get from cannabis. They're not looking to get fucked up. You know, people like to sit around, be very centered and talk to each other and lie down and that kind of thing. You know, that's the main context in which you find it used. Like, if you went to a traditional Afghan chillum khana or something like that, you know, they'd have like a chillum smoking house, you know, they'd have sort of like all these scenes painted on the ceiling, and you kind of lie back on some, you know, recline on some cushions and kind of space out staring at the ceiling, you know, that kind of thing. Yep. And I mean, different people, different cultures have different preferences for these types of things, you know.
Yeah, I think our get wasted culture might actually work against some people, like, who are trying to look for, you know, you're saying be exact about explanations or descriptions. It's the same for effects. If you try to give a accurate description of an effect, you know, the accuracy probably comes from consuming in smaller doses, where we're all used to, you know, smoking a whole J and getting wasted. You could probably find the nuances and effects quite different from a lot of these landrace if you consumed it in smaller amounts, I'm sure.
A lot of people end up doing that for sure. Like, exactly what you're saying. Like, they realize that you don't need to smoke so much to get the effect they're looking for, you know. And yeah, I think our Western culture, we tend to contextualize these things in the context of like our kind of discourse of these intoxication is very much based around the idea of getting fucked up, you know. So Europe is an alcohol culture primarily, and has been for hundreds of years. And insofar as places like the UK have been aware of other ways of getting fucked up, they've been plants like kind of the solanaceous plants, like kind of deadly nightshade and henbane and these kind of things, which again just like annihilate you. So there's been an assumption in the West that, and there still is an assumption in the West, that like intoxication means being
anesthetized,
you know, poisoned or anesthetized, exactly, like kind of mashed and out of your mind. So we tend to conceptualize everything in that way. Anyone who smokes enough cannabis knows that that's not accurate. But we've ironically sort of ended up creating a lot of cannabis varieties. Most modern hybrids do lean towards that type of effect relative to what there is out there in places like India and Southeast Asia and so on, you know. So and even Afghanistan, despite what I was saying, like there's a lot of CBD in most Afghan hashish, so it tends to be quite a centered effect, you know, like people don't want to get like paranoid or
Anxiety.
decentered. Yeah, you know, it's like it's like you can get very, very, very high on Afghan hash, but you don't so quickly get pranged out in the way that you do if you smoke really strong tropical stuff, you know, you know.
Would you be okay to speculate a little bit? I think a lot of people want to hear you speculate on a few different subjects. And one thing is that, like, why has there been this shift towards this annihilating narcotic? Is there some sort of historical event or context, or how can people learn more? Like, what are your thoughts on this change?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely happy to speculate on that one. I mean, it's because cannabis has been forced into adapting to the 9-to-5 fucking shit that we all do. You know, it's just Protestant cannabis. You know, this is like Calvinist fucking cannabis that we've got. It's all.
Wait, can you explain that bit? Not everyone might follow you when you say Calvinist cannabis. What does that mean?
So it's like there's a guy called Max Weber who wrote a very influential sociological book called The Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And essentially it's the idea that, you know, that we're working, like our capitalist culture is an offshoot of a certain form of Christianity. You know, you earn your salvation by doing good deeds and whatever, you know, with Calvinism. And but my point is just that a lot of this is the cannabis has been forced into a certain role in our lives for most people. That it's something you do at the end of the day to switch off, you know. You work your ass off all day long and then you collapse in front of your mobile phone or the TV or whatever and smoke in order to just recover from the day and obliterate, to some extent annihilate yourself, so you can just forget what you've been doing all day long, you know. I mean, that's overstating it, but you get the idea. Like, our culture has produced a certain type of has very strongly pushed cannabis towards a certain type of high. It's not that there aren't other options available, but if anyone who's been looking at seed bank menus and dispensary menus for the last 20 years knows that haze varieties and pure sativa varieties have disappeared, and that's not only because they're longer flowering and that type of thing. It's perfectly possible to put those types of hazy effects into a shorter flowering variety if you want to, but what you will find if you go and grow most of the, you know, supposedly sativa dominant varieties is compared to the type of effects we've been talking about with South Asian and Southeast Asian cannabis. They're not nearly as stimulating. They've all been forced down a much more sedative type of route, and that's because that's the place that cannabis has been given in our culture, because we place so much emphasis on work, you know, and that's because we're Protestant, post-Protestant people, you know, if we're in America and Canada and, you know, the UK and places.
So the Brits, they had some kind of influence on the development of cannabis. Like, I'm certainly not an expert, but I understand that you know a lot about how the tobacco was introduced into cannabis culture in particular. I've heard you, or I've seen you write about that topic in India. Do you think you can tell us a little bit? Because obviously smoking cannabis with tobacco changes the effect too. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, the introduction of tobacco as like sort of an accessory to cannabis use?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, a lot of this, like you were rightly suggesting, is quite speculative, but the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that the culture of smoking cannabis in pipes, including the kind of water pipes, coconut nargile type pipes, or floor standing Afghan chillums that seem likely to be derived from them, that whole thing and that whole culture of smoking seems to post-date the introduction of tobacco into Asia. Like there really aren't any references to it pre the late 16th, early 17th century. Then suddenly in India and places you see a smoking culture emerge, and very, very quickly within decades become like omnipresent across the written record, and it just doesn't seem to have been around prior to that. And the earliest references you see to smoking cannabis in pipes in places like Afghanistan and Uzbekistan and Central Asia, Persia, and Iran included, from about the 1640s, 1670s, you start to see like references to smoking cannabis in India. This is a long time after Europeans had gone to the Americas and so on, and it all seems to post-date the introduction of tobacco by the Portuguese and the Dutch into places like India. And when you see the references to it, like they're all kind of saying like people are doing this in imitation of tobacco in Central Asia, which suggests maybe that they were smoking pure charas, because that's the word they use, charas, like hashish, dry sieved hashish in that case. But it's just that if you're looking at it from the point of view of a historian, that's what the record strongly suggests, is that at least in Asia, that smoking these things in pipes was something that started to happen after people encountered a culture of smoking in the Americas. Same goes for opium. You don't see opium smoking until exactly the same era. So the 1640s, it really just starts to become very clear that it's a thing that's happening, and that's because people who are doing business in these substances were just noticing it, because they were making money out of it. And a lot of the earliest European writing is people who were writing these kind of traders' handbooks, kind of merchant handbooks, saying, if you go to Java, you'll find that they're cooking down tobacco in opium and cannabis, selling it as this thing called mardak, which just means drugs, basically, in Indian languages. This was spreading around right up to the coast of China and stuff, and that's the point at which you get opium smoking happening, So early opium smoking was happening on the back of tobacco with cannabis and like nutmeg and things mixed in, and sometimes with coca leaf mixed in as well, So like basically the age of colonialism was an age of like intoxication. Everyone was getting wasted, Yeah.
And here we are.
Yeah. I mean,
Good times. Haven't changed much.
One of the comments was kind of synthesizing what you were saying, and drew a pretty interesting conclusion that maybe you can respond to. They were basically saying that modern cannabis is, very heavily influenced by the West, and that the widespread narcotic breeding was done by Indians and Indians mainly, Asians second, and that the resin gland development was mostly done by Muslims. And in my limited experience, I would say that tracks as well, actually. As far as like India and Central Asia, like what do you think?
Well, I mean, firstly, I just say like if I'm saying South Asia, I mean like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, those kind of bits of the world, and that is the kind of primarily, unless you're talking about the northern bits of Pakistan that are the Hindu Kush and so on. That's primarily, certainly from the Punjab southward, that's all kind of subtropical and tropical, excluding the Himalayas. I'm sorry, like, of course, Nepal, the actual mountains are kind of a frontier between these two different worlds. So when you're growing at altitude, it's a slightly different thing. But I wouldn't say basically, I wouldn't agree with that. That would be, I would say, an example of too much specificity means you lose a lot of accuracy. You can get a lot of tropical varieties. You can see it described in very early texts like the Ananda Kanda that I was talking about. They literally talk about the resin output. But as a dry product, it may not always be so obvious. And certainly some tropical varieties are not well suited to dry sieving. If you try and dry sieve some of them, it just doesn't work. But you'll find others that do work really well. I've found varieties in Laos that shed the resin glands really easily, you know. Yeah. It just depends. There's just a lot of diversity, and you know, looking at these genomics studies, you'll see like Afghan or Central Asian, whatever, Iranic, you know, desert Central Asia genetics, landrace genetics, traveled by sea all the way around India into places like Isan, you know. And then, you know, in northern bits of Laos, you will find no trace of them whatsoever. That may be due to introgression, but I suspect it's much more to do with just the maritime influence didn't spread that far north, you know. So the reason that Isan, which is northeast Thailand along the Mekong, developed such a reputation, and you have Thai stick and stuff, is because it's a zone of hybridization. So you get these amazing aromas and stuff because you have this mixing of like Indian and Chinese and Afghan genetics going on in these places, you know. Plus you have people consciously or unconsciously selecting for potency, you know. So that's why Thai stick was such a prestige. Yeah,
that's a good one. I just wanted to ask you to speak a bit about selection between these different areas. I've heard you speak before about maybe there's more selection that goes into like ganja rather than the hash areas.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. So the reason why there's much more potency in why, for example, if you were to take a bunch of seeds from Orissa or Thailand or Kerala or whatever, like straight from a farmer, you know, pure landrace, and sow it, that every plant would be suitable for smoking, as opposed to like smoking as flower, you know, as it is, as opposed to an Afghan landrace where it may be that, and this depends on the landrace in Afghanistan, but it may be that if you took a bunch of seeds, at least, you know, 1 out of 2 times, you would find that you would have, if you grew those seeds out, you had the flower, you would find that some plants would be suitable for smoking as flower, others would be completely useless if you were looking to get stoned, you know. So there's been a much lighter selection for potency in these non-flower cultures, in these hash cultures, because what you do if you're a farmer in Afghanistan, if you're making hash, is you dry all your plants, you sieve them all, and then you just take all the seeds and you mix them all together, you know, and then next year you grow the same, you just grow the seeds like that. So
right,
you have had a lot of selection going on, but this is probably sort of over the last 4,000 millennia, you know. Now and then you do have farmers who do a bit of conscious work. You have that in Nepal as well. You know, there are people, it's understood in certain places that, like, I've had many people unprompted, absolutely unprompted, say to me in various places like Nepal and Manipur and so on, oh yeah, you just keep the seeds from the good stuff, you know, and that's how you get really good ganja, you know. And similarly in Nepal as well. But these are sort of hash farmers. They do know that. And that's why probably Nepali hash can be so strong, but it's also much closer to the ganja culture. You know, if you want to go from Nepal to Bengal, it's not very far. If you want to go from Bengal to Afghanistan, it's quite a long fucking way, you know. So this kind of knowledge doesn't necessarily transmit, or it doesn't transmit so much, you know.
I think some of that comes from the closeness of the relationship with the people to the plant. So if you're making charas, you're touching every individual plant and you're feeling that. You're having that direct experience of what's acceptable and what's not. Whereas the larger Afghani fields, they're shaking down tens of thousands of plants, and you're getting your potency from diversity and concentration because you're not even concerned about the individual flower at all. You're shaking all that resin off, and then you'll know if that field was potent or if that little batch that you made was potent or not. But with your smoking flowers, an individual plant, or making charas, you have a much closer relationship with the individual plant, and you're going to recognize the potency there.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely true. In fact, I would say based on experience, like hand rubbing charis, a farmer will know like this is a good stick of charis because he's made it from plants that he's worked out possibly a month earlier are the strong ones, absolutely 100%. Like sometimes you'll have, always, if you go to particularly more off the beaten track places, people will just tell you outright like, oh yeah, you want to buy this stick and this stick, and if they like you, it'll be good stuff, it'll be much stronger. And a lot of the charis populations, like as in Himalayan hand rub charis populations, like lean very strongly towards type 1 and type 2. You'll find very few type 3 plants in there, whereas the Afghan populations, some of them will be like that, but a lot of them you'll find at least sort of 25% or whatever will be type 3. These are gross generalizations, but broadly speaking that holds true. Which points
Very
to
cool.
a history of artificial selection, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe for me, it was confusing when I was trying to sort of understand the difference between selection and mass selection, at least in the context of people thinking that land races might be never ever been selected, and then having to try and explain what the concept of mass selection is, right?
So, I mean, individual plant selection is simply like you have a batch of ganja, it turns out to be really strong. You keep the seeds from that batch. Chances are, it depends how you've obtained it, but if it's from a small plot in someone's village, it's probably all from one plant, Consequently, if you keep the seeds from that's individual plant selection. Obviously, in some cases, you may have good batches of ganja from several different plants, but in ganja culture, like sometimes you will get pure sinsemilla. Even these days, if you go to India or Southeast Asia, you will find batches of traditional product where there's not a seed in the whole lot. And that's not necessarily because someone's like knocked the seeds out. It's because they've just grown it as a true sinsemilla crop. Whereas if you are in Afghanistan, when the farmer is making hash, he will have dried out the entire field, picked all the buds off, removed as many stalks and twigs, and that will all go on top of some form of sieve, whether it's cotton or steel mesh or whatever, do all the sieving, and then the seeds will just be pulled together, just piled up in a big pile. So there is, you do that for hundreds of years. Like basically farmers, there will be a very, very light selective pressure because farmers will probably go, oh, that farmer's got really good hash, get seeds from him to grow a field for myself. You know what I mean? So you have got artificial selection going on, but it's totally sort of, it's very light, but if you do that for 3,000 years, especially if you started with some unusually potent cannabis, it's why you end up with these populations leaning towards type 1, But it's certainly a misconception if people imagine that Afghan farmers are growing like 20% THC sinsemilla cannabis. If you want Afghan cannabis like that, you've got to put in several generations of selection. I mean, Mel Frank said like with his Afghani number 1, he got those seeds from someone who had obtained them from someone who was in Afghanistan doing the hippie trail. He actually posted like 6 or 7 seeds back from Kabul to America by mail. Someone grew them out. It was pretty good. It's probably just happened to
Did we lose them?
type 1 plants. They gave them to him.
Me.
He then did like 2-3 generations of growing the plants, and just his friends would say, oh yeah, those buds you gave me were really good, and he just labeled it all. You do that for 2 or 3 years, and then he was talking to people at the federal cannabis place in Mississippi, and they're going like, where do you get this stuff? Like and that was just him just selecting an Afghan landrace for a couple of generations. And they were like, are you sure this isn't some kind of special, blah, 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 you know. And it's like, no, it's just I've just done a few generations of selection.
Yeah, I like how you explained how in the the Ganja regions. So maybe you can clarify as well. Like this is still considered a land race, right? A land race is still like, how would you explain that? Like it's a partially worked heirloom variety from a region where they still do these selections over the years with the specific good plants, but that's still considered a landrace strain. Is that correct, Angus, to explain it that way, or put it in your own words?
Basically, landrace is like a really misleading word. So I started the site like 2006, 2007 was when we did sort of deliberate trips for the website. And no one used the word landrace back then, like in the context of cannabis, other than like people writing science papers or whatever. The term became popularized sort of 2017, 2018. Like you can check this on Google. I'm sure they've got the data. But it became like much more frequently used around then, at least in my experience. It's a very, very misleading term. It comes from mainland European languages like kind of German and Danish and stuff. Landrace, would be the kind of term. And it was translated into English in the sort of late 19th, early 20th century as landrace. And that's a time at which the term race could still mean like a breed, So you can have a race of wheat or a race of this or that. And that can mean a cultivated, domesticated crop, and it can mean breed, So if you were to translate
like in French, we still use race to describe like breeds of pig, and it's like that's our word for breeds of pig and stuff like that. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to add.
No, that's exactly, So thank you for like exactly illustrating that point. In English, that sense of the word race is completely defunct. If you look it up, it's archaic. Like some dictionaries will still list it, but they will say archaic breed, So way down the list, if you look at dictionary definition of race, it will say breed. If you were to translate landrace now, landrace or whatever, landrace, I don't know how they say it, it would be country breed. Country breed would be the way that you would translate it if you wanted a good translation that gave you the meaning of the word. So this has just caused immense confusion, So all of the landrace is by definition a domesticated variety, domesticated as in consciously or unconsciously selected by humans for products that we want, So it's an artificial creation of human beings. It's region specific, generally speaking, but not even necessarily, They can travel very far. You can find African land races of cannabis that are genetically almost identical to Sumatran or Isan Thai land races, because they've moved by sea, and the sea for most of human history has been a connector. Modern and pre-modern history has been a connector of the world. It's not an obstacle especially not in the pre-modern era. It's the way you get around. That's why some tin pot island off the corner of Europe can end up globalizing and colonizing the entire fucking world.
You've been tantalizing us now. This is like the third time that you've mentioned sea trade routes or maritime trade routes, and one commenter specifically named the Chola Empire, so like Tamil Nadu, that sort of area. And I think at least I'd really appreciate hearing you speculate on who was bringing the weed around the oceans, because I mean, it was someone, right?
Yeah, fingers crossed. Like people will begin to work this out. It's hard to say, but I mean, the evidence strongly suggests that Persians, Iranians, Indians, Sogdians, who are kind of Iranic people, were probably a big part of it, but this is like sort of like retrospectively just based on the historical record. It's really hard to say. I mean,
look, it's okay. Look, we want you to, a bunch of people are going to go on some really deep rabbit holes after you finish talking. That's all we want.
I mean, basically, I don't know who it was who was talking about Islam as being a big factor, but that's absolutely sort of the historical written record strongly suggests that is true. But it was mostly what you kind of call like a Persianate form of Islam, very strongly influenced by deeper strata of culture that predated the expansion of Islam into places like Central Asia, Afghanistan, and India. But the fact is we don't know yet. But when you use all this modern technology to go deep into the genome of cannabis, which will be happening over the next couple of years, you may be able to work it out. If you start comparing the genome to other plants, particularly if you kind of root the cannabis genome along with kind of humulus, the hops and things, you can go back millions of years potentially. But most of what we're talking about, like domesticated forms of cannabis, obviously is going to be within the last hundreds of years to a couple of millennia. But evidence suggests that it was sort of Persianate forms of Islam, not necessarily even Shia, but just that bit of the world that these things came from. But I suspect like you could be talking about Tibeto-Burmans as being a major factor, and China certainly as being a major part of that story. It's just like it's really hard to say at this point. Like I haven't seen the really granular data, but my sense is that actually the research that's probably going to emerge in the next year or two will show that there's been a huge amount of connectivity even across the Eurasian landmass. We're talking all the way from Korea into Eastern Europe and down through Afghanistan and up through the Caucasus, and just these moving along the Himalayas, going way back into sort of 2000 BCE, 3000 BCE. Like basically humans have been moving around a lot, like getting stoned, fucking each other, getting into wars, trading, making money, being assholes, being nice, just doing stuff, and that this is likely to go back a long way. The fact is we just don't know at this point, basically. So I'm reluctant to kind of pin my opinion.
I don't mean to put you on the spot either. We just, like I said, a lot of people want to do, what little research they can, and having a few terms that they can start searching for is pretty helpful. There's another question for you, and this is one that it's similar to the what is a landrace, because it's something that a lot of people I think get confused about. Can a plant cease to be a landrace, and if so, when does it cease to be a landrace?
Oh yeah, I mean this is what makes it all so confusing, right? Because land races can fertilize cannabis fertilizes very, very easily. So a lot of the populations that you find around the world are sterilized land races. So in Wisconsin or in parts of Canada and Dakota and wherever, you can find these sterilized populations descended from introduced hemp and that kind of thing. And genetically, they'll look very similar to, kind of quote unquote ruderalis population from somewhere like Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan or wherever, or even further west, Ukraine or whatever, because they are just hemp varieties that have reverted to a wild phenotype. Epigenetics and all this kind of stuff comes into play. So yeah, absolutely, land races can revert to weedy forms, and that's what makes it very complicated. If you're in the Himalayas, like if you go to Nepal or bits of the Indian Himalaya, like kind of Kumaon or Garhwal or whatever, you'll see, like in the villages, you have these very, very, very domesticated looking plants in the field. For the most part, out of 20 plants, 19 will just have, big flowers and stems and big seeds, big fat kind of seeds for eating. Kind of, they can get as big as like a marrow fat pea in some places in Nepal, like really clearly domesticated for using as food. But then like right next to them in the village, like growing down next to some path, will be, I mean, literally like meters away in the village, will be some feral population that's clearly just been there and reverted to a totally like survival mode phenotype, narrow leaflets and spindly buds and tiny little seeds, and they're in like gene flow with the plants in the field, which is actually good news if you're growing at like 2,500 meters or 3,500 meters up, even sometimes in the mountains. You want those kind of hardy survival traits that are going to be in the wild phenotype. So, some Westerner will come along and say, oh, cut down that shitty stuff. It's going to fuck up your field. But actually, the Himalayan farmer operating in a much more sensible way, you want that. So you want that kind of resistance to disease and stuff that these feral populations would have got, by natural selection,
Yeah. Then there's the other side of it where it goes no longer landrace because of the domestication or the change in location. So if I take seeds,
my spiel, but like landrace just like is it's caused such a mess with our whole discussion. It's like they're country breeds, they're like domesticates, land races by definition. Some of them are less domesticated than others, but yeah, I mean, for the most part, like if you're talking in the Himalayas, it's the field plants there are very, very domesticated, even though they're in gene flow with feral, possibly wild in the true sense. Obviously they're not wild if they're in gene flow, but there are probably bits of the Himalayas where there could be bits of the Himalayas in Tibet where there are like truly wild, truly unaffected populations, is my guess. Again, guess, yeah. I don't know if that made sense.
Someone said, this is a slightly like, I'd say maybe a little bit of an aggressive question, maybe even a trick question. Is landrace a marketing term or a taxonomical distinction, basically?
I mean, it's a term that dates back to late 19th, early 20th century science, and it's best translated as country breed if you wanted to translate it out of Danish or German into English. These days, if you were doing the translation, you go with country breed. It can be used for marketing if you want to use it for marketing. I mean, certainly people have sort of done that. You can see some of the bigger, sort of multi-million type seed and cannabis operations in Europe and things have absolutely done kind of marketing campaigns based on this kind of thing. But I mean, per se, it's not really like, I hate the word, I sort of like for a while on my blog was sort of blogging about how like, oh, just stop using it, traditional variety or something like that would be better but the most important thing is that these are human creations, if we're talking about these country breeds are like human creations. In the Himalayas, they're for fiber, seed, and resin, hash, whatever, charas. Mostly, not entirely. Some are kind of used for flour, for ganja. But they're really, really diverse is the main thing, That's the most important thing for people to get. And that breeding any of them, creating IBLs from them is the most interesting and most important thing to do if you're really serious about getting into them,
Hey,
could I quickly ask you? Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go first.
I was just thought, like, just because you said that, Angus, like, just what excites you, maybe, like, what's still out there that you would like to get your hands on and do a little 2-generation IBL with to see what possibilities there are, or where are you going next that you're excited about? What excites you at the moment in terms of landrace cannabis?
I mean, for me, the stuff that's missing from things that I've collected, you know, and that people I'm associated with have collected, is the sort of if you've got a kind of mental map of Asia, you know, you've got Nepal and you've got the Indian Himalayas, you've got Kashmir, and you're going up into Pakistan and the Hindu Kush, and then up through the Pamirs and all the way around to the mountains called Tian Shan, which are like north of Xinjiang. That whole kind of arc of mountains, which actually ultimately runs all the way down into Burma and Thailand and Laos, and the southeasternmost tip. That kind of long line of mountains. The bit that's really, really missing from the collections at this point that people have done is that whole arc that goes from kind of Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, that kind of area, all the way around into China and southern Russia, you know. And I suspect that's a very, very significant part of the history of cannabis. And that's an area where like it kind of is more like people imagine, where there is a lot of like wild and feral cannabis around, I suspect. You know, I mean, there's a lot of cannabis around. Exactly how wild it is and exactly how feral it is, you know, and how much domestication has affected it isn't clear. But I think people have been moving around that kind of arc of the mountains for, you know, at least 5,000 years or so, and the in a big way. I mean, you know, in a way that's affected cannabis. And like what's really missing is that Tian Shan to Pamir's bit of the mountains. So if you know where Xinjiang is, it's this big desert area of Eastern Central Asia / Western China, politically inside China. It's a huge sort of desert zone. The mountains kind of curve around it, you know, and the northern bit of it, you know, we really don't have much material from around there, you know, like in terms of humans who are studying cannabis, and I think that's the most interesting bit. You know.
And is it slightly less traveled out there? Is that part of why, like, maybe acquisitions and collections aren't being done in that area? Is it a little more rugged and, you know, hard to get to, I suppose?
Like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan places are relatively easy to get to. The question is like the legality of the seeds. I don't honestly know, you know. You know, China and Russia, yeah, you don't want to get caught. Like, well, I'm not trying to encourage people. Basically, I'm just saying in the abstract, like in the abstract, those would be really interesting, you know. Yeah. Don't get caught with cannabis in Russia these days, and probably best not in China as well. I don't know the seeds there. It's a bit complicated, isn't it? Because there's like loads of seed production. But if it was like drug type seeds, I think, you know, probably not a great experience.
I looked it up recently. It's very illegal.
Yeah. Okay. So do not go and get seeds from these places.
Yeah. We when the whole war in Iran kicked off, we were looking at getting some seeds back, and couldn't get any flights over Iran, of course. And so
you might be getting
Kazakhstan. And we're looking at it like, all right, we're gonna fly through Kazakhstan with several kilos of seeds, and we're like, we should not do that. That's a fucking terrible idea. It's a big transit point for drugs heading up into Russia, right? So like opiate-based drugs and stuff. So they have really stringent border control and customs and everything, and they're very serious about cracking down on cannabis in the stands, basically. I mean, obviously it's not uniform, but by and large. Here, can you tell us more though? Like, so you mentioned it sounded like you were describing the Tarim Basin and sort of the whole mountains that fringe the Tarim Basin, and obviously, this is like one of the oldest areas of, or one of the furthest east areas that the Indo-European culture spread, right? The Tocharians. I might be misremembering. There was some sort of archaeological evidence of Tocharians with cannabis or seeds of some kind. But if you could maybe tell us about that, or what I'd rather know more than anything else is about Kashgar, and because I know you're pretty familiar with the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission, and I think a lot of people put Malana and Nepalese hash as sort of these ancient cultivars, but they don't really know about Kashgar, essentially. So maybe you could tell us about that.
Yeah, so the the thing talking about that big sort of arc of mountains is there's an idea called the Inner Asian Mountain Corridor as being this kind of route along which people in the sort of talking 3000 BC, 4000 BC type era were moving around between these places, and they've kind of they developed this sort of mode of existence where you're kind of seasonal migration between, like, summertime you go up into the high pastures and wintertime you come down into the lower pastures. And this way of existing in the kind of Bronze Age and that kind of era, there were kind of migratory corridors that became increasingly connected as a kind of very early phases of globalization were going on, and they spanned along these mountain corridors basically, and people would move between them. And that seems like, this is purely speculative, I just want to be very clear, like my guess is that's quite a significant aspect of the sort of deeper history of cannabis, and then if we're talking Kashgar and Xinjiang and these kind of places, that's quite a lot later from the sort of eras that I had in mind when I was talking about that mountain based migratory stuff. If we're talking, I mean, actually, that's not quite true. Sorry. There was, in parallel to this, possibly an opening of a kind of sort of grassland corridor that went all the way between places like Ukraine, all the way across in actually, kind of 3,500 BC-ish now I think about it. This shows you how little I've thought about it. I mean, that's if we're talking about the Tocharians, kind of proto-Tocharian, kind of way back, sort of proto-Indo-European, like, and then Indo-European people may have started to move between, what's now kind of Ukraine, southern Russia, Caucasus, Black Sea area, way over on the frontiers of Europe, all the way across kind of what's Kazakhstan, all the way into, the Pamirs and the Tian Shan and the Altai, and then northern bits of Xinjiang, like kind of Kashgar and so on, but I'm not sure what, like with Kashgar, like, that's a sort of oasis city, was a sort of, if we're talking way back, a kind of oasis city in that area. And you can find like very well preserved cannabis finds going sort of north from there into Xinjiang, because it's such a dry place. Things get preserved, and you can find these burials where people had like cannabis flowers on them and that kind of thing. But those are quite a lot later. So those burials are like 800 BCE, 500 BCE, that kind of era. So, a couple of thousand years after the things I was talking about before. But it's sort of interesting to me, at least, that how much you had people moving around even like 5,000 plus years ago. It's probably not it's sort of underappreciated fact about humans. Like, the world has been this process of globalization that we're sort of really getting into the crazy bits of has been going on for a long fucking time. If you analyze the DNA of those people,
British were like the first cannabis experts, though. Like in the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission, they said that the best hash came from Kashgar and the best ganja came from the Rajshahi.
Rajshahi, in Bengal, yeah. So, Kashgar. Oh, so this is, so now we're talking about a Victorian era. This is like Queen Victoria on the throne, and the Americans have like not been paying taxes for at least 100 years at this point.
Don't forget.
So it's July 4th coming up. I've got to get a few the raid bait in. That's really, like, even in the context of British colonialism in India, that's, we're well, like British have been in India for like 250 plus years at this point. It's been a colony for over 100 years at the point where you're talking about that, the good hash from Central Asia and the good the good flower from fucking Bengal and stuff, ganja from Bengal. That's like very late on. Like this is the point at which the British are realizing they're going to have to fucking leave India. It's like that's in the context of business. It's like people realizing this is a commodity. It's making us a lot of money, and that's why you get the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission and stuff. In large part, is because it's an economic thing, and it's underappreciated that Xinjiang was the major center of resin production, dry sieved resin, like long before Afghanistan. Not long before, but as a commercial center of hash production in a kind of very globalized world, it precedes Afghanistan.
Do you know of anyone who's ever gone seed collecting in Xinjiang?
Yeah, a few people have seeds from there. I mean, the USDA, Department of Agriculture, had like loads of seeds from there, and someone destroyed them all. Yeah. There's a whole load of shit that got like destroyed by somebody. No one knows who. Yeah, there's a guy called Frank. I always get his fucking surname wrong. Maya, the lemon, like Maya lemon, right?
Oh yeah.
So Frank Maya went across and 1912, I think, and collected stuff from the southern bits of Xinjiang, so like Yarkand and places, and then brought them back to the United States. They were grown out in Nevada, like 1913, something like that, in Nevada. So Nevada was like probably the first place where like real indicas, like broad leafleted Afghan quotes looking varieties were grown in the USA, probably, and then they shipped a whole bunch of seed from Kashgar as well. Like later on, like the British consul in Kashgar shipped like kilos and kilos of seeds to the Department of Agriculture, and then very shortly afterwards, the whole thing kind of got banned, yeah. But they were like, oh, this is exciting. We're going to have like a medical cannabis industry in the States, and blah, 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 and then it all just fucking didn't happen for another 100 years plus, Yeah.
Well, last few episodes, we talked about Mexico quite a few times, and we were talking about the topic came up of like Lebanese influence in Mexico, and like I was saying how I can't find any references to cannabis in the Philippines, which makes it hard to subscribe to the whole Philippine galleon model. And so could you tell us what you know about cannabis in Mexico? Because I think that'd be really cool.
So the sort of idea being that like cannabis crossed over to went from the Philippines or Indonesia or somewhere like that in the Western Pacific all the way across to the west coast of the Americas, right? Yeah.
A couple of people spoke over the years have said that referenced the Manila galleons as the potential origin for stuff as Acapulco Gold.
Yeah,
and I think it's because such little is known about history, and even less is known by people who don't study this professionally, that sort of latch onto what is known and just sort of pile everything in there. But I don't know. I'd love to hear what you know about cannabis in Mexico and its origins.
I mean, the main thing is like there's a kind of pretentious word for this kind of history, which is subaltern history. It's a terrible phrase, but it basically refers to the kind of history of marginal people who've been excluded due to reasons of class or economics, or which is practically the same thing, from the historical record. So their kind of world that they experience just doesn't really get written down because, frankly, until fairly recently, most of the world couldn't write and couldn't read. This is sort of the thing I'm talking about with Protestantism being such a big part of our world. This literate, book-based, text-based world in which we live is a fairly recent thing. And like, if you were working on a ship in the Philippines or whatever in the 1600s or the 1700s, if you were like Alaska, which is the LASCAR, Alaska kind of crew who were hired to work on these ships in those eras, and that word was used up until the early 20th century for crew on ships. Yeah, you weren't going to be writing down your life, and so we just don't know. It's perfectly possible that people brought seeds with them across the Pacific. Like, it's very likely, in fact, that it's almost certain, I would say, that like people on the ships that were going across the Pacific from that bit of Asia to the Americas the crew would have been people who were using cannabis and were using opium, because they were mostly Muslims, so they couldn't or wouldn't mostly drink alcohol. So their drugs of choice were cannabis and opium. And but the main reason I'd say that it's possible, even likely, but it's just like less consequential, is that most of the trade didn't go that way. Most of the trade went from Asia through the Malacca Straits, across the Indian Ocean, all the way around, or either through the Suez Canal or around the Cape of Good Hope, and then up across the Atlantic, to the Caribbean. So like a vast amounts of cannabis went from that way, particularly in the era of the British colonization of India, and of the Caribbean for the sugar trade and stuff, and all of that horrific history. And those were the two economically consequential places between 1600s and relatively recently, were in the context of the British Empire. India and the Caribbean were the really important economic centers. This is kind of interesting in the point of view of like we're coming up to the 250th anniversary of like people not paying their of American independence, because actually from the British point of view, the Caribbean and India were like the most important places in the world from the point of view of an imperialist, because they were the economic centers of the world. So that was the route that cannabis was moving, with all of these people working on ships, and then later on with actual conscious selling of like hundreds and thousands of kilos of ganja into the Caribbean. So yes, it's possible that it moved across the Pacific, but it's much more likely it went across the Indian Ocean bit of the Pacific and across the Atlantic that way. You know what I mean? So yeah, you can speculate about these things.
Well, so hold on, I wasn't clear. I'm not really a big fan of the whole Pacific idea because it's so far. What have you heard about Lebanese immigrants in Mexico? Like big waves of Lebanese migration in Mexico.
I mean, it would be like much later than.
Yeah, like in the 1800s.
Yeah, and even more recent, and there's loads of Lebanese people in Brazil, and I forget where, but yeah, there's been a lot of migration out of Lebanon. But if we're speculating about the kind of like early modern and like, late medieval movement, which is like, I think when things really started to get moving, is the age of sail, the maritime era, early phases of where we're at now in terms of these things. It was really with the emergence of like a really global trade system, which, just to be really like, for anyone who's like super nerdy about these things, the late 19th century was much more globalized than we are now, particularly with what this tariff stuff has done, So like yours, like a kind of, free trade, quote unquote, global system was like really fucking busy and really connected in the kind of late, sort of 1880s, early 90s, pre-World War One, like there was just like a lot of connectivity, and you could trade between places relatively unimpeded, and there was that was like a real golden age of hashish, and ganja and everything, So that would be when you'd be looking at, and that's when you really start to see it like cropping up in the Caribbean in a big way. You've got the British like consciously moving like hundreds and hundreds of tons of cannabis across to places like Trinidad and stuff, So it's like, yes, okay, it could have got to Colombia and stuff across the Pacific directly from the Philippines or Indonesia, but it's like much more likely to have come across the Atlantic to Trinidad and then got to Colombia from that way. The coast of Colombia like is practically the Caribbean. Like the Guyana is 100% the Caribbean culturally. So when they started to crack down on cannabis in the Caribbean, the illegal cultivation all moved to Guyana. And you can literally see like written records from Guyana where they're saying like the Indians like as in South Asian Indians who have moved into Guyana won't even touch the stuff that's coming from Bombay. Like they want locally grown because it's really sticky and it's like the real shit. They won't even buy it from the kind of British tax stuff that's being imported. They're like growing it themselves at that point. This is like 1920s, I think.
So like in the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission, which is what is it again, 1892? Yeah, they mentioned that there's the customs and excise addendums, and they talk about basically the majority of the production from Rajshahi was destined for domestic consumption within the British Raj, but a decent amount of it was exported, and it was I can't remember exactly how much off the top of my head, but several kilos were making their way to London, and also to the Caribbean in the 1890s. And I love to speculate, but it is also good to know what what we actually know on the record. And what we know on the record is that there was cannabis moving from A to B at that time in this globalized world you're describing. One thing that you've been talking about that kind of it takes a lot for granted. I think a lot of people know about the coolie trade, but like maybe not everybody. Like, so where was this? Who were the people bringing cannabis, and where were they coming from? Could you maybe tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So from way back, the highly plausible kind of candidates for people who would be carrying cannabis seeds, because they were carrying cannabis to get stoned for themselves, would be people called Lascars, who were almost all Muslims, because basically British colonialism was a process of the British and other Europeans wresting control aggressively of trade routes that up until that point had been dominated by Muslims, particularly Persianate Muslims. The Muslims and these Persianate Muslims had these family-based networks of trade that were well established for hundreds and hundreds of years. Prior to them, there had been Buddhists who had controlled these, Hindus also, but the era of Islam, it became very much that the international trade routes were dominated by large, there'd been Zoroastrians as well before Islam. And a lot of these people were Muslims and Hindus and Zoroastrians who converted to Islam, and then just maintained control of these things. The Europeans turned up and behaved very differently, were much more aggressive, and they took control of these routes, and they took control of systems that existed a long time before them, one of which was the Lascar system. And this was like people who you went to ports and you hired them in a block. You hired blocks of people to come and work on your ship. So if you were operating out of Sumatra, you would probably hire some Malays to work on your ship. They did all the crewing of your ship. And they were Muslims, and they generally didn't drink alcohol. And certainly if you were a captain of a ship, you fucking sure as fuck didn't want them drinking alcohol. So you mostly had them using opium and cannabis. And so if you're looking at these trade routes, like they would be prime culprits for like moving cannabis seeds between ports because they just had cannabis with them, And as this world kind of expanded across the Atlantic, primary candidates would be Lascars for moving it, and then you had the coolie indentured labor system, where slavery had been quote unquote abolished, and you got people who couldn't write, who would just sign an X onto a document, and you were entitled to move them out to the Caribbean to work on the sugar plantations, and they would have been often, you know, from Bengal or Uttar Pradesh and northern India and places like that. And yeah, they are much more likely to have been a major factor in the arrival of tropical ganja landraces into the Caribbean, you know. Because if you look kind of earlier than that era, you don't see in the kind of surveys that the British did in Jamaica, kind of botanical surveys, you don't see cannabis. Doesn't mean it wasn't there, but it didn't crop up in the surveys, you know. That could be because the British didn't think to go and look a bit further up the hill from the village, you know, or whatever. It was probably around, you know, but as a kind of mass phenomenon in the Caribbean, it really kind of starts to show up in that late 1800s, you know, I forget what else you asked, but yeah, basically it's a like within Asia, it's a question of the British, like, just, and Portuguese and Dutch and French starting to kind of dominate maritime trade, you know. From my perspective, like, as someone who's sort of spent a lot of time thinking about these things, it's what makes the current situation we're in so maddening, because we've got like an American president who thinks about the world in terms of like big country, small country. There's this lot of blue stuff in between, you know. And that's what you want to be in charge of if you want to be the boss, you know. But he hasn't quite got the message on that one. Not to say that I'm encouraging him, but I'm just saying, like, Russia, big country, shit place to control, because you're never going to fucking have much luck. Whereas if you control the trade routes like the British did, you know, that's how you do it. If you want to have your way of life dominating the globe, you know, that's how you do it, you know. Shit moves around by sea. If you want to get, you know, we all know this now because all this shit in the Strait of Hormuz and stuff, like, doesn't cost much to move these monstrously massive ships around. And that's what people have been doing for a long, long time, you know, long time before Europeans got into that. That's why the Dutch invented capitalism and stuff, you know, because they were a bunch of pirates who lived up on the coast of Northern Europe around Amsterdam, you know. The what they call them, the sea beggars, you know. That's what they used to get called when they were fighting the Catholics, you know. And they were a tiny little fucking place that managed to take on the Habsburg Empire, you know, because they had a lot of money because they'd worked out accounting and shit, you know. So yeah,
chat says not to get you started on the Habsburgs.
What's your view on the future of cannabis, Angus? What do you think? Are we damned, or are the good times just starting? Is there a bright future in terms of landrace cannabis and the direction it can go?
Yeah, I mean, there is absolutely. I mean, like, there's just different angles you can come at it from, you know, like ultimately everything needs to be decentralized, kind of like the internet. If you're going to have a lot of, you know, resilience, the thing is, like, we've just got a crazy situation now. There's a lot of like misguided regulation, and that makes it very difficult for research to happen. But, you know, it's one of our most consequential crops. We've got to be thinking about how to do these things. You know, the science is like 100 years behind in some ways. It's at very least sort of 50 to 60 years behind, you know. And that makes it really hard to talk about these things in a kind of informed way. But, you know, we've got like people bringing hemp fiber European genetics into India. That's disastrous, you know. And the kind of way we think about these things is the way we think about cannabis is so influenced by class and sort of status and economics and these kind of things, even within Asia. You know, I can't imagine Modi having an enlightened policy on cannabis in India, never mind the Thai government, who would be more plausible candidates, you know. So yeah, like, it's a very, very thorny, tricky thing, like on every level, to think about the future of how you secure the future for the biodiversity of it, You know, it is more complicated than any other crop, like by a long way, I would say. You know, as far as I know, it's dioecious, wind pollinated. It's a fucking pain in the ass to maintain a collection. You know, it's incredibly resource intensive, and it's barely legal, and you know, it's like really, really complicated. So I wouldn't want to be like unduly like optimistic, basically.
Fair enough. We won't make you answer that one specifically. I'm just going to change it a quick direction here before I miss this comment, because recently you've put up a post about your Appalachian mountain skunk. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, the collector in that bit of the world sent some seeds, basically. It's not a skunk in the sense of like the skunk #1 gene pool. It's probably not got much in the way of Afghan genetics in it, if any at all. You know, it's likely something that developed in that bit of the world based on imports from places like Mexico and the Caribbean and stuff. It's just that name skunk was used about it. It was used, sort of mountain skunk was just a name that was used for like good bud from the mountains there, you know. I'd say it's super interesting to look at because there's going to be like a load of resilience there, like good potency, likely quite a different type of a high from what you would get from the more Dutch Californian stuff, you know. Haven't had it like tested for genomics or anything, so I don't have more like granular detail on it at a genetic level, like much as I'd like to have.
There was another message about hermaphrodites, and it's you know, it's typical the whole coming to the landrace scene from growing modern hybrids, where a lot of the growers' manuals and books are going to tell you that, and also a lot of the bro knowledge more than anything else, actually, really, is going to tell you that hermaphroditism is a sign of bad work on behalf of the breeder or the person growing the seeds. And yeah, would you care to dispel that notion, or like what's the deal with hermaphroditism in landrace? Because you mentioned a second ago that it was dioecious plant, but I've heard some people say that it might be monoecious in some contexts.
So yeah, I mean, like that was misleading because I mean there are monoecious hemp varieties that have been developed in Europe and stuff. There's a lot of reasons why monoecy is a really good and convenient thing to have, like for a seed crop, you know, especially for seed and fiber varieties from Europe and stuff. So yeah, I was meaning just more in the context of if you're working with these land races to maintain a collection of them, you know, you're going to be dealing with like it's really tricky to do. You've got to work outdoors if you're doing any sizable numbers, unless you've got the greenhouses, and then you just think like practically speaking, like how many plants are you going to be able to have, and pollen's going to blow around and that kind of stuff. But yeah, in the context of land races, like monoecy is very much a thing. You have like I can't remember the technical terms, but there are various varieties of monoecy that you can have and stuff like that, which you find around in land races. Some of them are there just out of like the sheer diversity. You can find them in Afghan populations. They're particularly prevalent in tropical populations from India and places in Southeast Asia because of how old the Sinsemilla technique is. So if you think about it, like you're growing a field of Sinsemilla, in India, that would mean that if we're talking within the written record of the sort of 1800s and stuff, you'd have a ganja doctor, a podar, who would come into your field. He was someone who worked this specialized job. He would go, from field to field in Rajshahi or wherever, cut down your males, cut down the hermaphrodites. Normally they'd go around and snap the stem of them. And you imagine you've done that. But then like later on in the season, you might have some rogue males turn up really late. You might have some rogue hermaphrodites turn up really late. they end up pollinating your field. So there's just an unintentional selective pressure for hermaphrodites that happens when you're growing sinsemilla, you know. So the reason why you get so many Hermes in some of these tropical ganja populations from Thailand and India is that people have been growing sinsemilla, or kind of semi-sensi, or whatever you want to call it. Ganja would be the Indian word, for hundreds and hundreds of years. So you grow imagine you've got 100, 200 plants at least on your farm in Bengal. Like, yeah, no matter how many times the ganja doctor comes to visit, there's always that chance that in January or whatever, like towards the end of the grow, like you might just have a rogue Hermes, like a female just starts popping male flowers. Every time you're growing, like that becomes more likely, if you know what I mean. Like if you imagine the sinsemilla technique started in the 13th century, you've got all those hundreds of years that you've been increasing the likelihood of that trait developing in your fields, right?
So could it be said to correlate with high quality type 1 ganja then?
I mean, probably, yeah, it does. Yeah. I mean, these are things that I just can't like answer from a sort of objective perspective, but that seems an entirely likely idea. Yeah, that the trait is probably much more prevalent in potent lines, you know?
I speculate the same thing. It's like some of the most quote unquote potent varieties they're prone to go intersex. It just happens. And I wonder if we're trying so hard to get completely away from any sort of intersex traits whatsoever, are we losing something? What genes, what expressions are attached to that herm trait, which sucks and doesn't work for large scale and doesn't work for making money. But when it comes to the human experience, what are we throwing out? You know, what's that baby in the bathwater that we're throwing out with the herm gene?
Yeah, I mean, and it's the thing I was forgetting, like XX monoecious, so like true genetic females, let go monoecious are much more common because of the sinsemilla thing. And yeah, like there's going to be, if your one criteria is don't want that, then you're going to be unconsciously selecting against a whole bunch of other traits that may have just become attached to that, you know. And there's also XY monoecious, so like genetically male plants that will then, you know, express female flowers, and they're also around in the gene pool because at least in part because of people growing sinsemilla, you know. Like we've got a Greek variety that shows that trait. For example, yeah.
I know I haven't chimed in the whole time, but I kind of want to ask a question here. As far as the expression in the plant, what would be like? How would it show? Like if the trait, if it's an XX and then it goes monoecious versus an XY and then it goes hermaphrodite, like how would the difference in visible trait on the plant show up?
I mean, to be honest, the best people to ask on this are like actual crop scientists, not me. My assumption is just that they know the plant is genetically male. It presumably starts out male versus starting out phenotypically male.
The reason I ask is because I've seen like female plants that will bust out a full male branch, and then we have plants that will bust, you know, bananas out of the flowers. And I've myself have never had both happen to me. I mean, I've had one or the other, but never both. So
males that go like the males that turn female and which are definitely XY like are much less common, but they're around. They do exist. Like I know, definitely for sure, like the Moliotico variety we've got from Greece, which belongs to, as far as I know, to a sort of broader Eastern Mediterranean gene pool that's probably sort of like centered around Turkey. But again, that's a guess. But the Moliotico looks like genetically indistinguishable from Turkish varieties. So it's across the Bosphorus. That one goes. That one has like XY male plants that will show phenotypically like female flowers. It's much rarer. It's like agronomically, like potentially really a useful trait for breeding and for various other stuff. Whereas like XX is much more, XX monoece is like much more common. But the genetic and the metabolic pathways, even in XX monoece, are not, as far as I know, like that well understood even at this point. So for me as a non-specialist to speculate on it is like I'd be very wary of listening to what I say, because I haven't like read the papers. They're out there. If you look on my site, you can find them. Like I've linked to it from I have read them, sorry, but I haven't like understood them, read them. You know what I mean? Okay. They're around. It's only in the last like 2 or so years that they've started getting published.
Because I mean, I wonder if one form of intersexism wouldn't be more beneficial than the other, as far as addition to like terpene or flavonoid or cannabinoid profiles and stuff like that. And if you could isolate that in your population, you know what I mean, and then work it from there. I'm thinking more from a breeder's perspective, like if there is stuff that's attached to this, how do we utilize it in a fashion that benefits us rather than continuously kind of harms commercial production? So that way it's a more feasible method of growing the plant.
So if you go onto my site, like therealseedcompany.com, and Google Moliotico or Google Monoece, you'll find the papers that like there's reasons why Monoece is XY Monoece is super useful for breeding and all kinds of stuff. It's obviously a nightmare XY Monoece if you get it unintendedly in a field, but as is XX Monoece. But I suspect this stuff has a bunch of different loci on the genome that are associated with it, and possibly there are other like complexities to it with like pathways and so on. Because if anyone who started growing back in the pre-fem seeds era knew that if you bought 10 seeds from a seed company, like this was sort of grower law. I say new, like grower law, received wisdom was, if you make sure you keep the nitrogen levels up high, you don't let the plants dry out, you're likely to get a higher ratio of females to males. And I think that sort of actually is being borne out. That kind of folk wisdom of growing is being borne out like in the research, because it just makes a lot of sense if you think about it as a survival strategy. Like if you've got cannabis in the steppe regions where we know it's been for millions of years, everything gets really arid, it's a bad year, everything dries out. It makes a huge amount of sense for the population to shift towards male. Dump a bunch of pollen, you hope that you pollinate, like you hope as in you're the cannabis plant, that you pollinate a bunch of plants miles and miles away in a much better environment, next to a river or somewhere, and wild populations do tend to skew more heavily XY,
Okay.
This is almost a survival intelligence almost, right? The way the plant is intelligent enough to, like you say, judge the environment based season to season, and maybe, decide itself whether it feels threatened to become a hermaphrodite and live on, do what it needs to do to make it to the next season.
Yeah. Well, just natural selection. But yeah. I mean, who knows to what extent these things might, maybe the cannabis plant has been manipulating us,
We have to
Exactly.
pander for the creationist crowd for just a second, please.
Yeah.
Angus, can you see the chat on like the right side of your screen? There's like a comment section.
Oh,
And there's
right.
one
Yeah, yeah.
person who's like really concerned that you're not staying hydrated because we're asking you all these questions and you're talking.
I'm rehydrated. Thank you for the concern. Yeah.
You know, do you want to just, in case, we're getting close to 2 hours here, Angus, and we'd love to have you back again eventually, but maybe before we finish up, maybe tell everyone where they should go to look for your seeds. I know you have site for your landrace stuff, but you also have a website for some more modern seeds that you have as well.
Yeah, so you'll find it if you're on the realseedcompany.com. You just on the blog and you're on the links, you'll find it. But yeah, quickseeds.com, KWIK. This was sort of in joke that's got stuck way back. Where I have a bunch of like 1990s Dutch material and increasingly got some early 90s like Appalachian stuff. There's the Appalachian mountain skunk, and there's the what's the other one? Monkey tail. We've got the Jamaican line that I forget. Oh man, I should. Underground Seeds Collective did. One of the breeders associated with them. Got some Colombian and Colombian Mexican crosses, all kinds of heirloom lines at the Quick Seeds site. So if you go into like heirloom or hybrid, and then like a whole bunch of like hybrids, crosses using like the Pakistan Chitral Kush that goes around Spain, and like Friesland and various other like really good outdoor lines, for people who are working outdoors. And actually, if you're working outdoors, there's also some really good pure land races you can use if you're like a little bit north, like Sudanese, funnily enough, is a really good one. Sinai, the Syrian and things. All of those are like really good if you're working at like kind of 30 to 40 latitude, even north of 40, they'll do really well, like 43, 44. I've seen them do like really well outdoors. They'll be like finished in sort of like early September or something. The Near Eastern varieties like Sudanese and Syrian and stuff.
Love that, because I'm up in Canada and I need these earlier finishing.
Yeah, I mean, Friesland is like a Canadian, well, Dutch one obviously, but like our Canadian our Friesland is a Canadian line, like established to Canada. It's really good outdoor plant, and we've crossed it to like Erdpert, I think is the name, like a Swiss mountain variety as well, and that is like bulletproof, and nice. Like amazing aromas and stuff. Sudanese is the one I'd say, like if you're looking for like a population with a lot of type 1, like really good kind of tropical type buds, and from way down in like South Sudan, like way down the Nile, that is a really interesting variety. Like when I gave that to some researchers, like it was one of the first ones that they checked, because they were like, oh, we haven't got anything from like around here. And they're like, yeah, we're going to have to revise like our whole fucking cannabis genome just based off this, Oh,
wow.
Yeah. So, fuck knows what's going to eventually emerge when they've done all this research. We'll really find out like cannabis is from like, Zambia or something,
So much to go into, like your depth of knowledge, just like Eloise's. We definitely want to have you back.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, and thanks like for inviting me on and like for like letting me ramble. I hope some of it's been like coherent. Like I tend to just sort of like assume like that I'm making sense, which I might not have necessarily been.
We love the cannabis ramble here for sure.
Yeah. I still have a bunch of questions for next time. Like heaps of random stuff that's sort of come up. Like one thing is like your experiences in the UK smoking weed. Growing up, I think that that was a little bit of a glory days for all these different imports and stuff. And I'd love to hear you talk more about that. And people have all these misconceptions about soap bar and slate and stuff, and I can't think of someone who could clear them up better than you.
Soap bar.
I didn't mean to call you an expert on soap bar. That wasn't intentional, by the way.
I mean, no, I mean, like, yeah, just fucking. That was just that's what I was meaning about, like how rotten a place it was, like for cannabis. Like who the fuck, would even go near that shit? Literally, just was like the worst Moroccan hash, and people would buy blocks of it, and there'd just be bits of plastic in there. Like, I mean, this was just wrong on every level. But the good thing was, there was like also just because of the same reason why there's like stacks of other like things around in the UK is like you could get Nigerian, Gambian, Senegalese, all these things would turn up, if you just had the right, if you knew the right people, basically. And good Moroccan would turn up as well. But soap bar, like, thank God, is a thing of the past. I mean, like, that's why the indoor thing took over here, like, so quickly, because that was the primary product,
But for many people, you are the right people for us. You know what I mean? Like knowing you and getting your knowledge. I had one last one. I hope it's not too much. Yeah. Why should people grow land races?
Well, I mean, no one has to. It's like, why should you bake your own bread and brew your own beer or wine or whatever? Like, it's up to you, isn't it? But I mean, I like what I hope people will start doing who've got this kind of like type of interest is to start creating their own IBLs. That is the thing to do. And I trust me, like what I've been saying will be borne out. It is true. Like just a little bit of selective pressure, these plants radically transform.
Yeah.
Could you give us another quick one? Could you give us?
I don't mind staying longer, to be honest.
One more quick one. Can you give us, for the people who want to grow some landrace who haven't got into it yet and are afraid, can you suggest an easy landrace to get into? And then for some of us that have like our sativa wrangler badge, maybe something a little bit wild that you think we'd enjoy. So something easy to get into, and then something crazy that could be exciting.
So the main thing I'd say, like, if you're going to start growing in pots, and this is a really major factor to bear in mind, like, these plants, land races are not compared to modern hybrids, have not had generations or any generations in, if they're straight from the field, like the majority of what's on the site is straight from the field. On the real seed company.com site, direct from farmers for the most part. It will say if it's not, but they're not well acclimatized to being in pots. No plants like having their roots baked in pots. So if you imagine black plastic pot getting direct sunlight in the middle of the day or throughout the day, cannabis plants, especially land races, don't like that. They also don't like to sit in water with soggy roots. Like all of the good cannabis growing regions are places which have these very sandy, well-draining, rich, loamy soil types, like Rajshahi and Bengal that we were mentioning. So cannabis likes, landrace cannabis will like thank you if you give it like, a good light compost and some vermiculite or sand or something to encourage the so that it's not sitting with soggy roots too much. You can give them these long dry periods as well. You would be surprised how long they will stay happy with very little water in the pot, like especially kind of Lebanese and Sinai and that type of variety. But all of them, like the roots literally need oxygen. They literally need to breathe. So that's like a really important thing, like especially if you're going to grow these long flowering sativa types. If you overwater, if you overfeed late in flowering, they're just going to keep on putting out new buds. They might even start like reshooting and that kind of thing. So I'd say the main thing is to like really be aware that like you've got to listen to the plants, you know. If they start like clawing their leaves, that means they're stressed, and you're probably like overwatering them, you're probably overfeeding them. If they're still flowering after like 20 weeks, you know, you've just like fed them too much, you know, you've watered them too much, you know, like Bengali farmers in the 1880s and 1870s and stuff, like they were like explaining to the district inspectors and stuff who were working for the these were like Bengalis who were working for the British imperial system, like you know, the worst thing that can happen to us as ganja farmers is to have like a really heavy rain late in the flowering season around sort of January, February. It's like the worst thing that can happen because the flowers start shooting again, and we get these pests that start to infect the flowers, and the whole crop can be worthless on the market, you know. So I'd say that's more significant than which variety you choose, is to just recognize you've got to grow a slightly different way from what you might be used to, compared to plants that are really, compared to varieties that are really well adapted to being grown in pots, you know.
100%.
If you've got the option in the greenhouse or outdoors, like let them grow into land and just prepare the land well, you know. Dig in lots of like really old horse manure if you can find it. That's ideal. Like it lightens the structure. It's rich. You know, try to fertilize at the right time in the grow cycle. You know, that kind of thing.
Great
you know?
tips.
Yeah.
Hey Angus, did anyone tell you that these guys are all growing West Bengali varieties right now?
Oh, really? Right. Okay. Yeah. Oh, nice. Excellent. Yeah. So like the Chandakar, I think his name is Kerr. Like if you can find the report that he did, it's like early 1880s or late 1870s, like really detailed report on the techniques and the like economy of the like Rajshahi region, Nalgaon, like around there. The details in there are like really great, you know.
If anyone wants to find those, you can go on landrace.wiki on the West Bengal page. And at the bottom, you'll see all of the sources. And some of the sources even have their own pages on the wiki, including the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission and the reports by, I also can't remember his name, but Chandakar.
Chandakar. I think it's like Chandra would be like, it's actually like Chandra, but they spell it like Chanda.
Right.
CHANDER. But yeah, it's like
really fascinating material if anyone wants to dive into it. Angus, can we get a tier list? Like, I don't know if you've seen the memes, you know, like people like ranking things like S tier, A tier, B tier. Like, what's your hash tier list? I know obviously it's purely subjective, but like based on your personal preference, what's the global hash tier list?
I mean, like basically the highest like production quality, like in terms of how meticulously it's been produced, you know, the kind of stuff that like bubbles when you put a flame to it, but that's traditionally made. It's not like it's not like actually made with bubble bags, and it's not made from modern varieties. Like that level of like traditional hash that's the time I saw that level of quality like at source was 2000. It was the 2006-2007 season stuff that was coming from Balkh and Mazar-e Sharif in Afghanistan. That was really, really pucker, you know, like first class production quality. They would call it like first Garda, a lot of it. Or like this is one of the another extra name confusion, like Charas or Charas is a Persian name. That's the name that's primarily used in these regions. So like really good Mazar-e Sharif Balkhi type hash that I saw for the production quality, the aroma profile, absolutely first class. Like for smoking experience, like ironically, it's like not the most potent Afghan hash. Like more potent stuff tends to come from around like Logar and Kabul, you know. But the Afghans prize the Balkhi stuff more because they're like actually looking for a kind of like like I was saying before, a kind of more centered experience from it. So it's very, very strong. I mean, for an uninitiated, like, non-smoker, it would blow your fucking head off, you know. But for someone who's got a bit of a tolerance, it's just like, oh, this is just a really nice smoke. Like, it's a little bit trippy, it's a little bit like head high kind of effect, but it's got plenty of CBD in it. The kind of stuff I like personally, like, I prefer the kind of Nepali type of hash. So I've seen that same level of quality of stuff around kind of hippie old timer smuggler type characters. Like, most of them are fucking dead now, like, that used to hang out in Nepal, who just kind of made a life there, and they would arrange grows up in the mountains in Nepal, and kind of have like contacts in Europe and the places who they would sell hash to, and they were making that level of dry sieve, you know, that same kind of ultra sticky stuff that you just had to pack it in, like, stuff that you couldn't just like weigh out a, you know, eighth and then wrap it in cling film, because you'd never fucking get any of it off the cling film, you know, that kind of stuff, you know. Yeah, so that was the kind of production quality stuff level. That would be the stuff I like most. But then in terms of the type of effect, you know, like, my preference is probably more for like the kind of high that you get off hand rub, like from places like Nepal and things, you know, where you're nearer to the type 1 gene pool, you know. It's just like a stronger, more stimulating kind of buzz, you know, that you get where you've got a bit of mixture between the ganja gene pool and the mountain, the feral and wild varieties in the mountains, you know. If you're going to make hand rub, like, if it's mostly from type 1 plants, it's just like, yeah, it's just fucking better, you know, for me anyway, you know. It's basically like making hash from haze or something, you know, or skunk haze or whatever that it was that Dave Watson used to use, you know, for his dry sieve, you know.
Yeah, he was exclusively sift smoker, was that not right?
Yeah. I mean, he was making dry sift from like haze hybrid haze and stuff, you know. So he was making dry sift from like stuff that most of humanity had only ever smoked as flower, you know. But you can get like hash made from those varieties, those kind of broad gene pools in Nepal, like a lot of the around Kathmandu and places. Like, even if you just go up around the hills around Kathmandu, like, they'll be making dry sieve from what are basically ganja gene pools. They're just varieties that the resin glands separate off nicely enough, you know. You've got some on the website still, like the one called Dakshin Kali, the one called, like, I don't know, Nepalese mountain ganja or something, some kind of uninspired name that I came up with. They're just populations from like Kathmandu Valley and around there that are like going to be like mostly type 1 and type 2, and people make, quotes, pollen out of it, you know. Like, that's if it's a good variety, if it's a good example of those varieties, it's a pretty good smoke, you know. That's what kind of made all of the that's why they've got such a cachet around, why Nepal got such a cachet with the hippies and stuff, you know. Like, you find this dry sieved hash made from type 1 plants, you know. It's like, that's going to get you way more fucked up than anything from Afghanistan for the most part, you know. I don't know. Did that answer the question? Kind of.
Yeah. I feel the same way. I don't think I've got anywhere near the same experience with the Afghani hash, which frankly is limited to stuff that you could get in the Basque. I forget the name now. There's a Basque name for it, but ETA, the separatist group, used to. They used to bring in a load of hash from Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the town that I'm currently in right now is like, apparently the most hash in France at any one time is in this town, because we're right on the Spanish border, right in the Basque country kind of thing. In Scotland, we really only ever had gold seal and like red seal and like the sticky black, as it was colloquially called. And so the experience with Afghani was relatively limited. And when I first smoked Milana Cream and it was just, you know, similar, sort of darker colored, and blew me away. Frankly, much prefer a hand rubbed charas from the Himalayas over anything I've tried from Pakistan and Afghanistan. But I've just tried so little, so I'm not as confident as you to make that judgment, I guess. Yeah.
I never saw like real Afghan in the UK. Like it was always bunk, like mixed with pine resins. Like no one realized that's what it was, but because everyone tended to, like everyone, but the culture at that time, it's changed now obviously, but the culture at that time in the 90s was still to roll joints with tobacco if you were a hash smoker. Like for me, I would always put it pure in a pipe or pure in a bong, which is how you do it in Afghanistan, like for the most part, unless if people are not, who knows, these days probably they've got Rizzlers and stuff, fuck knows. Certainly you have Rizzlers and stuff in Pakistan, but if people were smoking with tobacco when I was in Pakistan and places, it was always a question of like, you empty out the cigarette, you keep the paper all intact and everything, then you mix the hash in your hand with the tobacco, and then you kind of angle the cigarette and then kind of suck the tobacco and hash back into the cigarette. You know what I mean? It's a knack, but it's easily done. But that's the only way you'd see people smoking tobacco and hash mixed in Afghanistan. The normal way to smoke would be pure in a floor standing water pipe, But the kind of like, if you read Howard Marks and people who were smuggling hash into the UK in the 80s and things, like ironically, like if you read the Mr. Nice book that Howard Marks did, like he describes them making fake hash. He doesn't realize that's what they're doing, but he describes it exactly like without realizing. And then he gets to the end and they're like, oh, they took all my money, because they invited him up into the tribal mountains area, like around like Khyber Tira Valley area, and they sort of took him to the hash making place, and like he describes them like they sieve all of the plants, and then they start mashing up all of the buds and things that are left after they've sieved all the plants. Like they take all the shitty bits of plant that have no resin glands left on them, put them into these kind of pestle and mortar machine things, mash up all of that. And then I'm sure they get some like pine resin and whatever they can buy cheaply, mix that all up, and then they mix that with the for the export stuff, they mix that up with the bit of the resin glands, just enough so that it's like 5% THC or something, stamp a gold thing on it, Mazari Sharif or whatever, and export it to Europe. Like you could find real like first Garda would be what they'd say, like pure resin gland dry sieve. You could find that in Holland, but I never saw any of it in the UK. Like some people I think got genuine stuff, and in Canada you could get it as well, especially in the like early 2000s when the war on terror was going. There was a point where like loads of it was getting exported with Western ISAF military who were flying back in these big cargo planes and stuff. But the most of it, what I saw as gold seal and red seal was fake. It was nice to smoke, but it's like just smells nice. It didn't get stoned off it. Not in my experience, anyway. But
that's what I remember from the sticky black was.
Yeah.
You go buy 10 pounds, you get this little black putty thing, and it smells great, but it doesn't really get you very high.
Something else like MDMA or whatever at some nightclub, it's like really nice just to smoke a cigarette. It smells fantastic, but other than that, it's a waste of fucking time.
So what was slate? What was the slate?
I don't know. What all of that stuff was. Like the only place you can get like really meaningful data on that, other than like anecdotal stuff, is like labs that have analyzed it. It was like things that they just people put anything in that stuff. There's some really just fucking unscrupulous, awful people, and I don't know why people bought it. people would buy it. Like they'd put in glue and diesel and fucking.
Well, I mean, I can shed some insight as to why I bought it, because I was poor and I was self-medicating with whatever kind of substances I could find, you know.
Yeah, no, it's just unscrupulous people, unfortunately. Like, that's why that whole market evaporated, because there was just too much of that kind of behavior going on, you know. It's yeah, I mean, who knows?
So
Like,
actually, I heard that the market for sort of, so I spent a lot of time in Christiania. I was in Denmark for a number of years, and Christiania was a big destination for hippies returning from their travels, much like you were describing in your youth. And I remember first going there by then it was already very much changed from sort of the glory days. But by early 2010s, you could still get, there was like briefcase hash, which was like much thinner always because it was smuggled in briefcases. And then there's obviously always there was eggs. And then there was always going to be like some kind of charas, some Moroccan stuff, some cashmere. And then I feel like sort of that was a fairly standard menu that you'd see across like most of Northern and Western Europe in the places where that existed, right? Like Amsterdam, Christiania, etc. And I heard a lot of the old timers say that it was, there was a lot of factors obviously, but it was 9/11 that really fucked things up, because previous to that, there was far less security in airports. And so it was a lot easier for people to bring back material, whether it was up their ass or in briefcases, right? Does that sound plausible to you?
Yeah, kind of, but I mean, like, I think the post 9/11 there was a massive surge in production, because and surge in the amount of like hash around on the market.
Well, hold on, let me clarify then. So the theory goes that 9/11 happened, and that once there was lots of production increase, but there was a tightening of the smuggling lines, and the intelligence services would have preferred a sort of consolidated criminal network to deal with, rather than loads of hippies independently bringing hash back. And so there was a fairly
overthinking it. Like someone in the comments is saying exactly the thing. Shipping containers. That's what everything moves in. Like the amount of hash you could fit up your ass or whatever, or in a suitcase.
So hold on. Okay, fine. That's fine. But so in Christiania, like the best stuff was not the stuff that was moved in shipping containers, because that stuff, like the big cashmere bricks, of course it's coming, but that's not that good. Like the best stuff was definitely stuff that was hand carried, at least in my experience.
Yeah, but I mean that's the thing. I mean, like, unless we're like, I mean, look,
because the mafia is not bringing in the best Kashmiri. Like you already described that process. Like guys like Howard Marks, who are, you know, big buyers at the time, like they don't know shit. And so if you really wanted to smoke like First Garda or something, like you had to know someone who came back with some stuff. Really, for me, that's been largely my experience with all the drugs. Like it's my turn to move on to the no-note subjects, but like, you know, stuff with like ecstasy and LSD, you know, like it's. You need to know someone from the right places, you know, like Israel, the Netherlands, or someone who's just recently returned, and everything else you just can't really trust. And so in the big marketplaces like Christiania, for example, to go back there, you know, I'm a bit of a snob, so I'm just turning my nose at the big bricks and the stuff that's coming in the shipping containers, and I'm actively looking for the stuff that's brought in by the people who really know what they're doing when they're buying stuff to sell. And I just feel like that whole culture it's not, I don't say it doesn't exist, because I don't believe all those people are in jail or dead, but it's just really disappeared, you know. Like where could someone today, you know, go and try and find some First Guard outside of Afghanistan? Like it's crazy.
I mean basically, like just objectively, the really big year, the really big seasons for northern Afghanistan were from the beginning of the Western invasion of Afghanistan, if you want to put it like that, when the Northern Alliance, who were on the side of the Americans and the Canadians and the British, the ISAF forces were fighting against the Taliban, who were basically in the south, So between 2001 and 2008, there was just a massive surge in production along the north in Mazar-i-Sharif, Balkh province, and Sheberghan province, and Kolman places, where they're all Tajiks and Turks and stuff, like Uzbeks and things. And that's always been the historical center of production. And there was just a huge surge in production. It sort of peaked 2006, 2007, and there was just like loads of first Garda and stuff coming out of there. And how exactly it got out of there into the rest of the world, I don't know exactly, but it was fucking not hard to get hold of it. Like, it was everywhere in Peshawar and places, which is in Pakistan. I mean,
I guess that just means I must be a schmuck because, like, well, throughout my life, I've looked very different at different points, and I've pretty much you get sold bunk pretty much right at the edge of the field, almost like finding, for me, my experience finding like really good stuff has been pretty difficult, and so I'm not trying to dispute or anything what you're saying. But I'm just blown away that there was just all this great hash that was coming out of Afghanistan. I didn't get to fucking smoke any,
Yeah, I don't know where it went after it was there, but you could find it in the Netherlands. And the reason why the Netherlands is always like, you can, and this is all backed up by the Europol data and stuff. If you look at the usage rates and just the amount of stuff that's around, it's a port, Rotterdam and whatever, and stuff just pours in there, and it still does even these days. I'm sure 9/11 like made things more difficult in some contexts. It certainly made it more difficult in the context of an individual going through airport security. But 2008, 2009, 10, like when I was hanging out in the port, there were guys I knew there who would just, like you're saying, with the suitcase hash, you would just go to a shop and they would make a bag for you. All that kind of like knockoff North Face gear you can buy like from Nepal and stuff. That's like the jackets and the bags and stuff. There's a whole industry of making knockoff brand trekking gear in Nepal. So yeah, you would just go to someone and they would just like sort of like stitch up 1 or 2 kilos of like dry sieve into a bag for you. And if you were mad enough, you just 10 milligrams Valium, you get onto the plane in Kathmandu. You just hope they don't fucking stop the plane in
cross your fingers and go.
Yeah,
I would never fucking dream of it, but
yeah, but thank God some people did, because that was the stuff I had access to, like basically like music festivals, like more the hippie side of things, like I always avoided the more like mafia stuff. I was so stoked when I got to leave the UK, because like the UK for me was like, it was crazy, man. Like it was all like meeting fucking Vietnamese guys in like the toilets in some car park to buy like some weed grown by slaves and some. It's like it was just. You said the word Philistine earlier. I think that doesn't even begin to describe the culture of cannabis in the UK. It's pretty fucking crazy how unappreciated, how people just don't give a fuck where and what their weed comes from.
Well, it's also that the sort of old timers who do those things, they're quite cliquey, and if you're bringing back those kind of quantities, you have to sell it to a couple of your friends, and then you've got your stash for the rest of the year. I mean, that's how it was with Thai Stick for the most part. That's an often overlooked factor. Like, yes, people would bring back in, people would sail all the way from Pattaya all the way across the Pacific in a yacht with a bunch of Thai sticks. But that was a tiny portion of the US market in the 70s and stuff, in the late 60s and the 70s. Nearly everything else was like coming from Mexico and the Caribbean, and that was being done like with people who would just park their ships like sort of 10 kilometers off the American coast in international waters, and then they just fly everything in these little speedboats, like they would just buy like fields in Mexico and then flog them, in Florida or whatever. But everyone else, like who was like the kind of movie producers in California who were smoking Thai Stick and whatever, they were buying from a very small amount compared to most people who were smoking. But that's always been the way that like really high-end import, it's not producing great quantity. I mean, it's not imported in great quantity.
I guess like it's a little bit of a game for, I'm outing myself here. I was that like annoying stoner who's like, I know the older people have the good stuff, and I'm always hassling them like, have you got any flowers? Because like eventually you figure out like it does congregate in certain places, right? Like if you really are on a mission to try and smoke some fucking red Lebanese in 2006, like you know where to go. I think we've already named those places. There's music festivals and stuff. Because I mean, it's a very specific personality type that that takes those risks and was on those big smuggling voyages. And it's those people have absolutely captured the collective imagination of the cannabis community for decades now. Because as much as the nitty gritty stories of the mafia and bricks and gasoline tanks and stuff like that, the surfers and the stoners and the CIA and the Brotherhood of Eternal Love and all that is just far more romantic, I think, and far more in tune with where modern cannabis culture is. Given that it's so heavily influenced by this Calvinist American culture.
All that, Dutch and British as well. I mean, that's like where that stuff all started. But the thing with Amsterdam, Calvin was, I think, French, but anyway. But the thing with Amsterdam is, when we went to Amsterdam in the 90s, you could still find like good Lebanese and stuff there. I think even these days, probably if you went to the right coffee shop, you could find it. There was was it Katsu or somewhere? Katsu. One of the coffee shops.
Oh my god, yes, that was fucking hell. That was such a good coffee shop. That was, if you wanted really good imported stuff, that was the place. Yeah. Christ, what a clutch.
And then, random sort of small coffee shops in the late 90s I remember walking into, and there was really nice red Lebanese and stuff in there, really strong, Even in the UK I've seen strong red Lebanese,
Can we talk about that a little bit? Can we talk about the Amsterdam experience in a coffee shop and what that whole environment feels like? Like, what is that interaction? What is that transaction? What's the atmosphere?
What era?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, how has it changed also with modern tourism and genetics and the way the cannabis legalization industry's influenced it?
Can I start by just saying that your timeline is right. 25 years ago, I lived in the UK. I was in London.
What?
And yes, I was there 25, 26 years ago, or 22 even. That little timeline, it was very hard to get the good stuff in the UK unless you knew someone. The heads would know someone, people knew someone, and it was there. But what was available was really bad. So we used to travel to Amsterdam. It was $100 or a 50-pound flight. And in 30 minutes, you were in Amsterdam. And I went every year for a couple years running. And after the first visit to Amsterdam, at the very end of my 3 days, because 3 days being high in Amsterdam feels like 2 weeks. But right at the very end, I smoked hash, and the hash was so good that the second visit I took to Amsterdam, I never smoked any weed. The hash was so good that second visit, all I bought was hash, and it was the black Afghan hash. You would get the Nepalese. There was this Moroccan that was the beautiful blonde. Anyway, I just needed to sneak that in there before anyone else said anything. But that experience in Amsterdam 20 years ago was amazing. The hash was so quality out there, and that kept us going back year after year consecutively from the UK.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't know what it's like these days. I haven't been back for years. I think the last time I was there was 2008 or something. But yeah, you're getting the if you've got the good coffee shop, someone's named some of the famous ones, like Tweede Kamer was good as well. That was pretty good. But yeah, I think Katsu was the best. If I think that's the right name anyway. It was a little bit further out of town, and
Yeah. Next. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, have I fucked up the sound here?
I went recently. I went to Amsterdam in January. I went to visit some family in the UK in January, and obviously, I took a quick flight to Amsterdam because who wouldn't if they were in the UK from Canada? And I just went. I actually went for a day. I went for like 12 hours. So I was the crazy Canadian who landed in England, jet lagged, spent a day there, then went to Amsterdam, and I just ran around for about 12 hours trying to consume as many great sativas as possible. And there is still some good stuff there. I found Dr. Grinspoon in one of these far cornered coffee shops. People are saying Bluebird is good, Dampkring is good. I can't remember the one I went into because I was so high. I had super silver haze for breakfast. And then just before lunch, I had Dr. Grinspoon, and it kind of had me running around Amsterdam on. I was definitely walking fast. Let me put it that way. But there still is some good stuff to be found out there. But I think you need to go to these corner coffee shops, maybe not the ones in the center of town.
It's just changed so much. Like I think the Christiania was like an anarchist free town that was an entire old military base converted into a commune, and there was a heroin crisis for a number of years, and things were not so great. And then it turned into a hippie market where people would sell the stuff that they were bringing back from like souks in Tunisia and markets in Goa and whatnot. Like people were selling all sorts of chillums and cool stuff, and it was a place where like whenever like sort of somebody was visiting from Jamaica playing dub or whatever, like they would play in Christiania every Friday night. There was free community concerts where they had like some of the biggest names in, well, the coolest music at the time. If you smoked weed, that was from like the 1990s onwards, and it was kind of the place to be, and in a very similar way that Amsterdam was. And I went to Amsterdam around the time that Angus was there too. I think my last time was there was like in 2009 or something. And with my little experiences, I was very young at that point, and it already felt very commercial compared to Christiania, which felt way more like roots. And to answer your question, Ryan, it's like, I don't know, man. It's like, first of all, it's Europe, so everyone's like sitting outside in like terraces and stuff like that, and you're just smoking big doinks. It's lovely. There's music, there's great food, and in the best times, a wholesome atmosphere. I think anybody who's been to Christiania in the last, I guess 10 years or so, probably tell you that the atmosphere has changed a lot. Same with Amsterdam. But Amsterdam, it was always like these little islands, like you have these like coffee shops that are separated by just a normal ass Dutch city, and you just feel like an alien cruising around from coffee shop to coffee shop, and that the locals don't really like it too much either. And frankly, Christiania also has that vibe, like depending on who you talk in Denmark, they might be like, what the fuck are you doing in Christiania? But yeah, before the bikers took over, which was like in the early 2010s, it was super fucking chill. It was really, really, really cool.
Yeah. I really appreciated that about India up in the mountain villages, because it was a mature atmosphere. You could sit down, everybody broke out their shit, you rolling up a spliff while you're waiting on your food. Your waiter or the owner of the restaurant comes and chills with you, and they're smoking or passing a chillum around, and it's just, you're having a good time. And like you said, it's wholesome human behavior. And I hope to see a maturity and a level of that in the US and Canada and everywhere, where we can have small, sure, certain communities won't appreciate it, but the places where love to be able to sit down and go have a panini and a coffee and a joint somewhere and just relax, shoot the shit, put down life for a second, and then, right now we got to do that in our own little private circles, and that's fucking awesome. That's great. You meet good people that way. You keep your circle small, but I think that's what will really bring acceptance to cannabis culture, widespread, just maturity like that. Like, yeah, you might not like it, but this is the area where this happens. Walk on by, you'll be okay. It's not the end of the world. Let's keep going.
Yeah, cannabis consumption and socializing is important, and I think that helps. The way that it's accepted in Amsterdam and in these places where you go in India, the exception of it, I think, is really important to make it, a
Yeah,
little
I
bit.
don't know. It really like I don't know. The locals don't really like it in Amsterdam, and again, like the Danish locals are very split.
Just
And
accepted, but
then in Parvati, for example, that's even more nuanced. How would you describe the situation in Angus?
Oh, sorry. I mean, it's always had there's always been, as far as I know and as far as I can tell, a kind of a fraught relationship between normative mainstream society and cannabis in most of the world. It's just sadly something about human nature that we look for out groups, we look for people who can be scapegoated, and cannabis users are quite an easy target. Hippie bashing, basically. Hippie bashing has been a pastime in countries much older than the United States. They were hippie bashing in Egypt and Syria in the 13th century. I mean, it's just
What? Seriously? Can you tell us more about that?
I mean, that's where you find the earliest written examples of people outlawing cannabis consumption.
Okay. I thought we were gonna get like like the fucking South Park episode, right? Like some sort of like the earliest recorded joke about hippies like dates to ancient Sumeria.
Yeah,
They
I mean,
smell like patchouli.
yeah, essence of petunia. That's the. No, I mean that's a Woodnell joke. But, yeah, it's I don't know. It's just how it is. I mean, it doesn't mean that we won't eventually have a sensible kind of relationship between humans and cannabis. But God, I mean, it's sort of one of the factors is that it used to be, or still is, quite normal for groups of people to congregate in parks and sort of in urban centers around South Asia and places. You'll see people still sort of crouching together and smoking a chillum when they can get away with it and stuff. And that sort of groups of guys, migrant laborers congregating and getting stoned together is just a sort of thing that a state-based culture like the police and the government and high status groups will often single out people like that because they're nervous. All the proles are getting together and they might have some dangerous ideas. That's just been the way. You can read the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission. It's quite a sort of interesting document because you've got an unexpected disagreement there between, on the one hand, the English and British imperialists who are quite keen to not ban cannabis because they're making a lot of money out of tax farming it. And then on the other hand, you've got the Indians who are on the commission, who for the most part are quite okay with the idea of just taxing and controlling it a bit. Then you've got the extreme anti end of the discussion who are sort of would these days be kind of Hindu nationalists, sort of kind of people who'd be really keen on Narendra Modi and stuff and things, who were like, this is a terrible substance and it all needs to be banned, and it's especially hashish is terrible, ban it because it's not even Indian anyway, it's a Muslim thing that's coming with Muslims from Central Asia, So it's in no way sort of meaning to minimize the role of particularly America in global prohibition, but it wasn't a new idea. It's an old idea that goes back way before Westerners got involved at all in kind of cannabis, of prohibiting, you know.
Stop the free thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's an easy target, you know, for sort of so
most
yeah.
cannabis users want to be passive. You know, they're not trying to fight a fight. They're just trying to, hey, leave me alone.
Well.
Most. I said most. Most. We all know of the hashashine and the word assassin and all this, but you know, but that,
No,
I think that
wasn't
comes
talking
from
about that.
no. I mean, everybody, we're all on different spectrums, but I think that comes from when we get pushed and oppressed too far, and then that was part of the British, the people running the actual trade. They recognized that if they took charas and hashish away from Indian people, they were going to lose a lot of their labor too. They were going to start putting up a fight for it, and I think that was documented and argued in that document. You know, it's just you can only oppress a people so much, and depending on how tightly woven their culture is into that thing you're restricting,
100%.
how hard they're going to fight for it. And so that's what I think a lot of the prohibition has been an attempt to do, is just completely sever like what you had said earlier in different episodes, Eloise, to sever the identity of the Filipino people with their plant, because any people that grab a hold of this plant, it gets woven into your culture because it's so utilitarian in so many different ways, and it allows sustenance in harsh environments, whether that's high northern cold altitudes or really desiccated desert environments. It adapts and it helps the people adapt. So I think that's what the real attempt of prohibition was to just completely sever that and make them reliant. And look where it's gotten us. It's still here. So the people that are still creating seeds and still holding on to little pockets of isolation matter. Definitely appreciate that.
I think that you're right on a lot of levels. Like, just very simply, like it's the process of sort of society and industrializing, and countries in the sort of model of development, right? So you no longer see people growing any of the foods that they consume. Cannabis, for a variety of reasons, is a crop that has been sort of integrated into the economy quite late. I think you were also spot on about the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission report, because that's actually the exact context that it was commissioned, was to ascertain whether it was whether it was a good idea to ban it or not. I think.
Was it worth the fight? Was it worth the investment? Was it worth the amount that they were going to have to?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Angus, but I believe that was the context, because there's a whole section which is basically opinions, and it's all the opinions of all these different people who have whatever related stake to the cannabis industry in India at that point, and they're all sort of weighing in on what they believe. And it's honestly really diverse. There was a whole bunch of different opinions about weed back then and what should be done with it. Some people were pro banning it, but the majority of the opinions recorded, it seemed like, were against banning it. And there was some mention of like people would be pissed, but most of it was it's just not worth it because it's just so ubiquitous. That was the gist that I got out of it anyway.
Yeah. So the context of it was that it was a kind of preemptive strike that was intended primarily for a British audience. So, a major factor in the eventual end of British imperialism was the domestic opposition to it. It was never very popular, like even back at the beginning. It involved very few people from the UK, so even at the peak of British imperialism, they were more Indian, and I'm talking, Bangladeshis and Indians and Pakistanis. There were more Indians in London than there were British in India throughout the entire 350 odd years of colonialism. And they were people who were off the boats, lascars and things like we were talking about earlier on. And it was largely quite an unpopular enterprise, because the East India Company would continually bankrupt the UK in its kind of insane adventures and share speculation. And then one of the factors that became really decisive in the move to end it was just the outrage at what was seen as kind of narco-colonialism, So the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission was basically an attempt to sort of see off the anti-opium campaign. It was intended primarily as an intervention in that on the behalf of the government, you know. And yeah, it's a really cool document in the sense of it is just like a lot of it's straightforward, just interviews with so many different people from across India, not just the administrative class, but, you know, normal people, you know, sadhus and
Right.
all kinds of different people who they spoke to. Yeah, I mean, one of the, like, yeah, exactly what you've said. Like, one of the major factors was just the sheer impossibility of prohibiting it in such a place. You know, I mean, they couldn't. I think a lot of the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission is probably bullshit in the sense of they're claiming to have done this great job of, you know, preventing smuggling, and they continue to claim to have done such a great job, and right up into the 30s and 40s. Oh yeah, we're getting most of it. Yeah, really. I mean, the Himalayas,
it slips through though. It slips through. So like, if you read carefully, you'll see them say stuff like, so there's no licensed cultivation in Kuch Bihar, the princely state, right, just to the north of, and then it's almost like a throwaway line, beyond the normal level of cultivation, which is like, that's probably quite a lot, actually.
Yeah,
I would imagine.
exactly.
When I was there, it was a lot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, and it's like, how are you gonna police it in those places? It's just ludicrous. I mean, like, especially as well when you go sort of east further into what's now Bangladesh and stuff, and you get much closer to Burma and places, and it's just like mountains and rivers everywhere. Like, this is like classic hubris, you know, that we just keep on making this over assertive Western governments with ambitions to sort of, you know, ideologically driven ambitions to intervene in the world. Like, even these days with drones and things, you're never going to fucking be able to police places like that. You get down these rivers and stuff. It's the reason Appalachia and stuff are these major centers of cultivation. You know, it's just impossible.
Honestly, I'm not sure I share your confidence there. I'd really like to, but my experience has been that since they launched drone, they have like a specific drone squadron in Sri Lanka now for hunting wheat fields, and also one in the Philippines. And this is like in the last 18 months. And immediately you just see like a huge up. I'm not claiming that they'll completely eradicate it, but you don't need to completely eradicate it. Like, it's enough to severely disrupt it. And the topography has historically made it such that you couldn't really penetrate these terrains to any meaningful degree. But especially now with the longer range batteries on the drones, you can get like an hour of flight time on, you know, or more, and just scope the whole area out, you know, from above. It's pretty, and like also the satellite maps, like I don't want to reveal too much, but like you absolutely can completely track where people are growing cannabis in places like the Philippines and Sri Lanka by looking at the recent satellite maps. And I think that it's more a combination of, like, I don't think anyone actually really wants to eradicate cannabis, and it's the same thing as in the UK back then. It's all domestic politics with, you know, politicians, as always, trying to appease, you know, whatever group they're trying to appease. But fundamentally, in places like India, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, the politicians are absolutely in on the game on multiple different levels. There's so much money to be made. And so, you know, for example, right now there's huge eradication campaigns in Mizoram. And there's been riots where the women have been, you know, attacking the cops to tell them to release the men from jail and stuff like that. And the local politicians are really hesitant to. There's a really sort of ambiguous response, and Delhi's looking at them like, "What the fuck, guys?" And it's really simple, because everyone's in on the take, but something needs to be done, and something will be done. But, you know, and what it turns out to be, at least in my limited experience, is catastrophic for the land races if it's not even if it allows the survival of cannabis or continuity on some level. It's really bad for the diversity of the genetics when the drones start flying, basically.
They just want to control it, right? Maybe not eradicate, but control. Control means they get to keep what they want, which is the money, right? The taxes.
Yeah, I mean, I I sort of I'm sure like you're right in the sense of in the sort of medium to long term, the as long as there's some degree of cannabis prohibition being enforced, that is going to, as they argued in the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission, that will primarily force other economies to emerge. So the obvious example in the part of the world we're talking about now, broadly speaking, is the massive sudden emergence of methamphetamine production in Afghanistan. That's become a huge business now that the Taliban has quite seriously cracked down on the opium production and to some degree also the cannabis production. And it's very easily done there because they have ephedra growing as a wild plant and cultivated plant increasingly. So yeah, I mean, as they argued back in the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission, which was sort of broadly speaking a kind of common sense liberal in the loose sense of the word document. Yeah, if you prohibit this, you're just going to force people onto taking other things, which back then meant opium and alcohol and things like datura and stuff that were just growing as weeds. So yeah, I'm sure you're right. Like, that's what's so scary, really, is the combination of the sort of panopticon of internet surveillance with things like drones that you are gonna, if they do tighten the enforcement, gonna end up with worse, well, more dangerous, risky substances emerging in their place. Which you kind of already have you've had for a long time in a lot of Southeast Asia and increasingly in places like Pakistan and Afghanistan and stuff.
Even just with weed, without switching substances, when the production becomes untenable in the open, it becomes hidden, and due to the constraints on transportation, and you have problems with then mold and stuff, and then you see the bricks that are soaked in mustard oil and the little chapsticks and stuff like that in northeastern India. It's just really obvious. If you don't, if something is in so much demand, and you cut off the healthy, sort of easily available option, then the demand is going to be satisfied with less, inferior product, really.
The only thing I'd say is that if you go to sort of Manipuram places, I mean, the extent of the cultivation there is absolutely off the fucking charts, because you've got a combination of that kind of terrain of rivers and mountains, highlands, plus a state that's been impoverished by just the economic dynamics of closing off that border with Burma. Manipur was the richest state in India at the time of independence from the UK in 1947, and it's now one of the poorest. And honestly, within well, I mean, as soon as the hills begin outside of Imphal, the capital, like, you're just straight into like fields and fields and fields of cannabis, And as long as that's politically in the kind of condition that it's in that state, then I think that's going to just be, their mass cultivation for places like Bangladesh and stuff.
Right now there's huge amounts of weed in Mizoram, and lots. I can't remember the name right now, but there's a name for the little islands in the Brahmaputra that kind of start in Kuch Bihar and make their way up into Assam. And apparently, Nepalese mafia are coming up in boats. Bangladeshi coming up in boats and doing massive cultivation on these riverine islands. They're really there's so many of them. They're shifting. They have pretty great soil, right? Like, it's all this silt being brought down from the Brahmaputra, and this apparently is really, really astounding. I haven't been able to go and see it, but I was hoping to last year. And as far as Manipur goes, according to the Indian Landrace Exchange, there's been a bit of a paradigm shift in the last few years. I mean, I haven't really seen this information anywhere else, but there's been a big shift over to poppy cultivation, and then since the communal violence sort of started again in the Imphal Valley, there's been also a big sort of drop in cultivation due to the heightened police and military presence due to the intracommunal violence, right?
I believe that. I mean, one way or another, though, the demand from the big cities in places like Bangladesh will be answered, you know? I mean, unless it's being substituted by the large amounts of other shit that's coming across from Burma and stuff. But I mean, I guess my point is, like, even in the United States, you know, the most powerful, wealthiest government in the world in terms of the federal government, there's still outdoor cultivation going on in places like
that's true.
So that's true. You know, and in India, it's like state governments, apart from Kerala, which is getting mentioned a lot in the comments. You know, Kerala is an unusual sort of example of like where there's a highly motivated state which is really looking to eradicate stuff. Apart from there, like, I don't know of any. Maybe Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu and stuff. Not Andhra, but Tamil Nadu. Maybe, you know, they've really got rid of most cultivation. But places like Orissa and Andhra Pradesh, and the further north you go, like, okay, Bengal, maybe they've got rid of most of it because it's all done like in the states around there, you know.
Right.
I mean,
hey, so when I was reading, now that we're on the topic of all these different Indian regions, so going through the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission, a couple things that turned up that were pretty interesting. One of them was, and honestly, I might also be getting confused with the gazetteers, like the different Bengal subdivision gazetteers, and they were essentially saying that the podar went round, right, but that a seedless crop or even anything close to a seedless crop was never really achieved. And in describing this and sort of trying to chase that down within the source, I found a couple things. One was that the cultivation had originally come from Jessore, further south in Bengal, and had been moved up to Bangladesh, and to Rajshahi, and then that the model for the podar for that system of cultivation with the person coming in was actually taken from a place called Khandwa in the central provinces in today's Madhya Pradesh, and there was one of the interviews where they basically said that Khandwa was the only place you'd get a truly seedless crop. And I saw a couple days ago that India has started to the process of decriminalizing, or at least to give licenses for research and stuff for cannabis, and it's in Uttarakhand, in Himachal Pradesh, and Madhya Pradesh. And so, you know, given the existence of Manipur, of Kerala, of Orissa, I think it might come as a surprise to the international community to hear Madhya Pradesh is being listed as a center of, for licensed cultivation. But I'm now sort of excited to go to Khandwa and see what that's all about, and see if get some more information on the truly seedless weed. Have you heard anything about Khandwa over the years? Does that ring any bells?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, it certainly features a lot in the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission. I've never been there myself, but I mean, when I saw like truly seedless like buds in India, they were from Nasik, which is not so far from there. And with the product out of what's now Bangladesh, Bengal, it's hard to say. I mean, if there was seeds in it, which I'm sure a lot of the times there were, it would have just been that the podar didn't get there early enough or whatever, or that they were hermaphroditic or very late males that pollinated it. But I mean, the basic technique of the knowledge that you have to cut down the males is very old in Asia. You see it described in Chinese agronomic texts like the Qiming Yaoshu going way back. That was in the context of cultivating hemp for fiber and seed, but the knowledge was there, and there were and are certainly land races with sort of drug level potency, as it were, which you find in that bit of Northern Asia, Northeast Asia, around sort of Chifeng and Korea and stuff. So I think the Sinsemilla technique is, you know, a couple of thousand years old at least, and definitely originates in Asia, not, you know, 1970s Mexico or whatever has been claimed over the years. But it's sort of obviously true sinsemilla is hard to find. You know, I've never bought a large quantity of anything in Lao that didn't have at least one seed in it. You know, we bought, you know, kilo quantities, which you'd always find at least a couple of seeds in. It was always very frustrating when you didn't find them, you know, more than that in many ways, because it's like, if it was any good, you wanted to have them, you know. But yeah, I mean, I'm very sure that's not something that Westerners introduced. They may have demanded it. You know, I think the reason why Thai stick was so good in the late 60s and early 70s was, as with all these things, a combination of the demand side and the supply side. You know, so in Nepal, in North India and in Nepal, like in Lucknow and those big kind of Indo-Persianate cities of North India, you could get the, you know, Nepalese charas, hand-rubbed Nepalese charas from the mountains just directly north of India. You know, would take, you know, a day or two to get from the field down to the city, but it would fetch its weight in gold. You know, like literally. You know, that sounds exaggerated, but then you look at the prices of gold and cannabis in late 60s, early 70s America. You know, it was multiple times at points. You know, gold wasn't that expensive in the 70s for quite a long time, and cannabis, good quality cannabis, was really sought after. You know, Afghan and Thai would get way more than gold, weight for weight. So yeah, try fucking eradicating that, you know. It's just not going to work.
Right. I've been trying to track eradication campaigns as far as they've been documented in some kind of media, and it's yielded some pretty interesting results. I put them all on a map and with a little timeline, so that you can scroll through year by year to see where what the patterns are essentially. And well, it's very incomplete. We've got too few data points to really extrapolate any meaningful pattern, but already it looks like there's some things emerging, and it seems like eradication is intensifying in the last 24 months. There's a lot of plants being cut down as we speak. The Philippines is going absolutely crazy with Operation Grass Cutter, as they're calling it. Yeah.
Yeah, not surprising. I mean, you know, I forget his name. He's quite close to the states. The current president, is he prime minister, president? But I'm sure there's big budget. Yeah, I'm sure there's big budgets to be had. You know, which is ultimately what a lot of that comes down to, is the amount of money that you can get out of enforcing these things. You know.
Yeah.
I don't think they cared. I mean, not that many people these days are genuinely ideologically motivated in the way that has sometimes happened, like in the past. Well, ultimately, a lot of it comes down to.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because that's actually exactly who's growing weed in the Philippines, is the Muslim separatist groups in the south. And at the very minimum, people in those regions where those groups operate, right? But there's been links in the past to between the widespread piracy and human trafficking and everything else that they're up to, and also with cannabis. But they're also flooded with right now. There's one of the commenters mentioned it. He said Noel Rafi, who I gather is from Kerala. And he mentioned that he's more paranoid about Thai weed being filled with whatever crap these days than the Indian weed, and that's honestly, that's pretty rough to hear, because, well, I can attest to that. You know, like frankly, I got sick smoking Thai weed in the past, because sometimes it can be loaded with pesticides and herbicides, or maybe even very often, and that's sort of like maybe even best case scenario when it's being exported out to India and places like that. It's really not the best stuff that's making its way there for the most part. And same with the Philippines, and it's flooded, right? So they've got all these like fake vapes, that people in Europe are told to stay away from, and all this like super low grade mafia weed is just absolutely flooding all the countries of Southeast Asia and South Asia because of the recent legalization in Thailand. The scale is honestly pretty astonishing. Like, it's way bigger than, we mentioned Howard Marks, and I don't keep up to date with this whatsoever, but it was like something like 70 tons, which, people said it was like the biggest shipment of hash ever or something like that. And very recently they found a comparable amount of Thai weed in the ports in one of the ports in the Philippines. It's not necessarily the best news if you're interested in the genetic diversity of the indigenous cannabis, put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing I'd say, is like the real focus, if people are serious about preserving these things, is like you either have to establish a structure, institutional structure, or sort of decentralized structure that enables you to do these maintenance grows to maintain these things, or you've got to get them to people who have the budgets to maintain them, like universities or sort of state operated operations, because other than that, it's at source, it's just going to get, it's only going to get worse. It's very, very unlikely to improve in terms of the vulnerability of these populations, So, Caleb, I think, is asking in the comments, like, if there are local feral pollen sources, it's basically impossible to grow Sinsemilla. And yeah, that's true. Like, that's why I suspect Sinsemilla was originally as an innovation, as a product that was regularly produced, or semi-sensi, whatever you want to call it, but like flowers which largely didn't have very many seeds in them. As a product type, ganja was almost certainly an innovation of the tropics. Probably it began to be mass produced in places well south of where cannabis grows as a weed. So, coastal Orissa, coastal Tamil Nadu, Sumatra, Aceh, Java, Kerala, although it can fertilize in Kerala at altitude. But yeah, and then if you have pollen flying around from these modern hybrids that are introduced, then if you're in an area where weed does fertilize, then as soon as the modern hybrid pollen is into the feral populations, you're just obliterating a lot of diversity as it mixes in with the feral populations and then repollinates the cultivated populations, and it's all fucked basically. So yeah, it's hugely irresponsible to bring seeds of these things into these places. Yeah.
Thankfully, I believe our audience here is largely aware of that fact, which there does seem to be a bit of a resurgence in interest, and I think that's why we're all here. Man, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time, Angus.
Yeah. I mean, I'm easy to talk. I mean, we've been going for 3 hours at this point, so I mean, that's just, if people still want to keep going, that's fine with me. I'm
starting to flag a little bit, but it looks like pretty much. Look at, we kept most of the audience. Yeah, there was 48 when I first loaded the page, and there's still 49. So if you had any doubts as to how interesting you are, you can keep a crowd for 3 hours, which honestly, that's a lot.
That's nice. Yeah. I mean, I sort of, I guess, I mean, I've sounded quite pessimistic, but I mean, it is great that people are, are sort of like interested in these things. It's probably been like almost going on for 10 years now that I've noticed that like a lot of people have got really proactively interested in doing, in these plants and in understanding them, which is a positive thing. I hope I've sort of encouraged a few people to think about creating IBLs and things, because I do think that is the most exciting work that can be done as a breeder, you know. I'm hoping that when more people actually do that work, they will see how quickly you can create such a change in the resin and the potency and the aromas and everything, enhancing all the positive traits. You know, there's four lines, I guess, that we maintain as land races, like the Mazari Sharif that I collected in 2007, the Lebanese that we got in 2000, that I got in 2008, and then the Tashka Gan that Lucas collected in 2018, and then I think the Syrian line that we got through IPK, the German project, the government project, I think it is, or university project, the botanical garden or whatever. So at least those ones and that we've just maintained and done like fairly light selection on, and like I say, it's just transformational. You know, something that's good already, just enhance it massively, and the speed at which the plants respond to that is just will astonish people. You know. And you can see in the photographs of the seeds and things that you have in the Victorian era documentation, when there was the beginning of some conscious work being done on these lines, that they were very domesticated, you know, the big seeds and everything, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, after all this, I think we've got a fairly good idea of your thoughts on a whole range of subjects, and that's wonderful knowledge. But after all this time, we still haven't really worked through your work. You know, like if people are going to be growing IBLs of your stuff, I think that we want to know all about it, maybe beyond what's necessarily already available out there, which is a whole lot. Like if anyone wants to go check out the blog on Angus's website, you're going to see years worth of articles on some of the most interesting topics. But yeah, I think I can't speak for the other people on the panel, but I think I'd really love to have you back to talk about all the work that you've done over the years, like the specifics of your strains, basically, of all the land races and the heirlooms that you've collected. Because at this point, it's how many? Do you know how many accessions you've collected roughly?
Honestly, I don't know. But I mean, of distinct lines and everything, it's actually it sounds like bullshit, but I think it's probably sort of 150 or so at least, because of the different accessions from the same places and stuff, you know. And I should just be clear, like, a lot of it is original work that we did ourselves, but then there are groups like Landrace Genetics, whose lines we retail, who did a lot of the obtained a lot of the lines we have offered from Afghanistan over the years. Like the vast majority came through them. There's some UK based guys, and then there's also you'll see in all of the strain descriptions, if you look at the sourcing details, like who we got them from. If they're not us, then
I know I'm not trying to be rude, because I know you've already put so much effort into putting up all that information out there. But if you look through the comments, you'll see there's people asking all sorts of questions that we haven't had the time to get into. You know, like people want to know everything.
the Iranian that Jade Nectar is doing, like, that comes from the Landrace Genetics people, like Cushman, I think, like, is the name that one of them uses, but he's affiliated with them. So that Iranian line is an authentic landrace. Like, the genomics absolutely support that. It's a lot like Mazari Sharif, as in the genuine Mazari Sharif landrace, not what's often called Mazari Sharif. The real Mazari, or Balki, the name Balki or Mazari is the name that Afghan farmers themselves will give to the real Mazari, which is a large plant. And this is sort of goes with the description that David Watson and people gave of the Mazzari line that they had. Will go up to 3 meters, you know, so it's not like a pure indica in the sense of it's not a sort of semi-dwarf plant. The Iranian that we have is very like the real Mazzari in the sense of it's clearly a kind of quote unquote indica sativa hybrid. You know, it's the genomics show that it's got South Asian, like pure Indian landrace in there, and it's got Afghan in there, which is why it's so tall, very, very high yielding, because it's a hybrid, like as most land races are. You know, most good land races are hybrids of at least 2 different types of populations. So yeah, the Iranian, we're on the second maintenance of that. Yeah, it's not surprising that people have found it so interesting, because yeah, it's a very high yielding, relatively early, relatively potent variety, because it's got that selection that comes from it being cultivated in India for bhang or for ganja, you know.
It's from Iran. You've been dancing around the topic of Persianate Islam, and I also wanted to try and prompt you to talk about the Mughals earlier. I think people really want to see more Iranian work. I think it's a really interesting country for cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, when I say Persianate as well, so Persianate is a sort of academic term, like Persianate culture, or sort of Iranic, you know, ethno-linguistic identity, like has, like in the loosest sense of the word, that encompasses not just the sort of modern political Iran,
right,
but places like Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, you know, Tajikistan. Tajik is another way of saying like Persian, basically. You know, Tajik is a term that would be used for sort of Persianate Central Asians, like a lot of the northern Afghanistan, where a lot of the hash culture traditionally concentrates. They're ethnically Tajik, you know, so they're regarded by the Pashtuns as being, you know, much more kind of leaning towards things like Zoroastrian type ways of thinking about stuff, you know. And then Iranic people in the broadest sense of the word, like historically the Scythians were Iranic, and you know the Mughals were Persianate as well, who ruled, colonized and ruled India for hundreds of years, were Persianate. And then, you know, I mean, that kind of Islam went all the way into Indonesia and places, you know, like Banda Aceh, like Banda Aceh in Sumatra. Banda means port in Persian, you know.
Right.
So this sort of type of culture has at times been way over in like Qifeng over by Korea, you know. So if you look at the statues and stuff that they dig up from around bits of like the far east of northern China, they're identical to Scythian statues that you'd find in southern Ukraine, you know, thousands and thousands of miles away, you know. But these people, like almost 3,000 years ago, were like existing all across these places, and evidence suggests we're like very likely all using cannabis, you know, at various times. It's a cultural thing and everything. Tajik people you find in Xinjiang, like in the Pamirs, obviously with Tajikistan, and those really early finds of smoking, of fumigation with cannabis, that there's those finds of like stones that have been used in burials and stuff to burn cannabis. Those are all from ethnically Scythian, so ethnically Iranic people, like 2,500 years ago in the high valleys in the Pamirs and stuff, you know. And then so that sort of seems to have lasted on into forms of Islam, particularly the kind of more Shia type
Yeah, I would really like to get into that. So I've been doing some digging into the balls in West Bengal and the fakirs and sort of the overlapping traditions of singing and dancing as related to cannabis. And it's absolutely coming from a Muslim context. Noel Raffi in the comments is saying that the progress in cannabis genetics is a sort of side effect of the Muslim anti-drug sort of sentiment, and I can attest to that in some form. Like the some of the Sufi traditions and some of the more like you might have heard of the sort of like we converted to Islam to get better prices on carpets kind of story that you get from communities in Southeast Asia in particular. Um, and I think that's where we see this concept of like we were talking about in the last episode with the Moroccan guy, like hayal, which is like a sort of an enlightened state of bliss that is achieved through the consumption of cannabis, and so Garcia da Horta in the 1560s documented a whole bunch of herbalism and medicine stuff in Goa, and he described every tier of society, of Muslim society in the sort of Maratha empire as consuming cannabis, all the way up to a king who apparently got so stoned that he decided to go yell at the sort of Portuguese enclave or something while half naked and had to be like dragged back, and that was like memorialized in history as like that one time that the king got so stoned he embarrassed himself in front of the Portuguese kind of thing. It was really sort of ubiquitous in these Persianate kingdoms, 1500s sort of onwards from Iran all the way through Indonesia, all the way across.
Yeah, I mean, there's like plenty of that's almost a kind of a trope, that thing of the ruler who gets so wasted. I'm not saying it's not true. I mean, it was just like something that you see described in quite a lot of places. So there's examples of that from like the Levant and things. Like European travelers like being hosted at the court of one or other Muslim ruler who turned out to be like just completely dissipated from just using too much cannabis. It's a fairly common phenomenon, and you see similar things with alcohol actually with the Mongols and stuff. There's like rulers who just were famously drunk the whole time, and there's an Afghan ruler in northern India for a bit around the time of the Mughals who was just out of his head, kind of like sort of kind of Patrick Bateman American Psycho level mad, who was just doing way too much hashish, and people just there's all kinds of stories that you can find. Most of it is fairly benign, like mostly Garcia de Horta's good. He describes a lot of the culture that's going on, and he says it's very, very commonplace amongst the military communities, not only the sort of sadhus and things, although those overlapped a lot in practice anyway. But it was all strata of society, from the aristocrats down to the farmers, who were known for consuming cannabis, and just varied a lot from region to region about how prevalent it was. But I think the whole kind of tropical and Central Asian and Middle Eastern sort of West Asian world, it was very, very common. And Islam absolutely did increase the prevalence of it because of the strictures against alcohol that were in varying degrees enforced by the different cultures. Some more loosely, others more stringently. Turkey, ironically, I don't think was that vehement about prohibiting, like the Ottoman Empire wasn't that full on about prohibiting alcohol, but also had like some of the sort of most high levels of cannabis use, amongst kind of martial warrior type communities, and amongst the sort of sadhu dervish type, not dervish, not sadhu, but dervish kind of mystical communities.
The decadence of the Pasha. Yeah, it's crazy how far the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction now with certain Muslim communities in terms of their attitudes towards cannabis. And funnily enough, the British are involved in that story too. But before we start any more rabbit holes and tangents, I have to peace out. Maybe
Yeah,
Ryan,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
want to stay, but I'm done. My head.
yeah. We've been going for
We're
4
in a
hours.
heat wave here in France, so it's 37
Yeah.
degrees in my apartment. I don't know if you can see I'm like sweating. I
Oh,
need to go take
fucking
a
hell.
shower. Like,
No, it's all good. This was a really in-depth,
Yeah.
information-packed, like really long format episode. So thank you. Thank you so much, Angus and Eloise. Thank you guys for your time. Thank you guys for your work and what you guys do in your private life. And thank you for sharing it with the public. Thank you for everybody watching. Thank you for everybody on this platform that gives us the opportunity to talk about this. Anything we want to wrap up with before we go?
No. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and yeah, looking forward to whenever people feel like doing another one. It's been a delight. Thank you so much for inviting me on, and yeah, it's been a real delight. Thank you.
Would love to have you on again sometime for sure. But everybody, take it easy. Go enjoy the rest of your day. Go get some rest. Thank you for
Yeah.
spending time with us.
Cool. All right. Adios.
All right. Later, guys. See ya.
Kijk dan.